Introduction. What is zero? What is infinity? What is the eternal? What is nothingness? What is the whole? What is reality? So many of these questions could be answered in common. One Obsession X chapter. Observing Silence. Alan Henderson was born in 1990 into an affluent Italian family that, like many at that time, fit into a social context that, while having economic affluence and maintaining a humble and discreet profile, was characterized by a fervent emphasis on social interaction and open communication. Children were expected to be boisterous, curious about the outside world, eager to play and express themselves. From a very young age, however, Alan manifested traits that deviated significantly from this expected norm. His parents, caring and attentive people, soon became concerned, noting his almost complete lack of interest in typical childhood games, colorful constructions, toy cars whizzing across the floor. He much preferred quiet, a marked reluctance to talk or interact with other children, even his little cousins at family gatherings. Alan spoke little, as if each word was a burden, a precious energy not to be wasted. His sentences were terse, direct, devoid of frills or affectation. It wasn't shyness, it wasn't fear of judgment. It was a kind of economy of language, an inherent belief that the superfluous was useless noise. He much preferred long to observe the world around him with an almost disarming intensity, his large, dark eyes settling on every detail with a curiosity that went beyond mere perception. He was not looking, but analyzing. He was not seeing, but deciphering. He spent hours seemingly motionless, sitting in a corner of the living room, or looking out the window, but actually deeply active in his mind. His outward stillness concealed an incessant vortex of thoughts, a cognitive laboratory in which every phenomenon was broken down and reconstructed. He stared at phenomena that most people took for granted, considering them mere backgrounds of everyday life. The lit oven, for example, was not just a source of heat for cooking Sunday lunch. For Alan, it was a spectacle of thermodynamics and convection. His eyes followed the flickering of the rising hot air, the shades of color that the glowing heating elements took on, the microcurrents that were created inside the compartment. It was an investigation into the behavior of energy, a practical lesson in heat transfer, a real-time experiment that his mind relentlessly recorded and analyzed. What was happening to heat air molecules? How was heat propagating? What was the relationship between the temperature and the brightness of resistances? These were the questions buzzing in his head, far more interesting than any game. The light from the bulb was not just illumination for reading a book or lighting a room. It was a study of the electromagnetic spectrum. Alan could spend minutes, hours, staring at the glowing filament, trying to perceive the different wavelengths, the imperceptible variations in color that the ordinary eye ignored. He wondered about the temperature of the filament, the way the excited electrons emitted photons, and how these photons interacted with the surrounding air and the surfaces of objects. The light bulb was a universe in miniature, a condensation of physics that fascinated him. The television screen, then, was an analysis of the persistence of vision, the composition of pixels, the refresh rates. He was not watching the cartoons that kidnapped the attention of his peers. He was studying the behavior of light, the geometric shapes that were created and dissolved with the movement of images, the subtle distortions introduced by the glass of the screen. It was as if he wanted to decipher the visual code of reality itself, to understand how the illusion of motion was created by a sequence of static images, how the human brain interpreted those signals. His real passion lay not in intact toys, those that remained shiny and perfect in their boxes, but in disassembled toys, reduced to their essential components. A broken toy was not an object to be thrown away, a failure to be set aside. It was a learning opportunity, a puzzle to be solved, a machine to be deciphered. He rebuilt them with a meticulousness surprising for his age, a patience that amazed his parents. He used whatever he had on hand. And glue for early, rudimentary repairs, screwdrivers and pliers stolen from his father's toolbox for more complex disassemblies, and, as he grew older, soldering irons for working with electronics. His small fingers, nimble and precise, handled the tool with the dexterity of a skilled craftsman. The arrival at home of old transistor radios, musical instruments that no longer worked, or the first, bulky, discarded computers were events that filled him with a quiet excitement, almost an inner quiver that only he sensed. He dissected them with the precision of a surgeon, analyzing every single wire, every resistor, every capacitor, every circuit board. He did not just look. He tried to understand their internal logic, the flow of energy, the function of each component in the overall system. At the age of 12, he demonstrated a practical understanding of electricity and electronics far beyond his years, building a working oscillator using only salvaged scrap and a simple 9-volt battery. It was a small triumph of improvised engineering, an early sign of H's extraordinary ability to see potential in disorder, to extract order from chaos. The arrival of the first personal computers in homes, with their green screens and promises of a digital future, marked a momentous turning point in Alan's life. They were not for him mere tools for gaming or entertainment, as they were for many of his peers who used them for early video games. For Alan, they were portals to a universe of pure logic and endless possibilities. He learned programming in a self-taught manner, devouring technical manuals found in flea markets, fascinated by the rigorous syntax and power of the code. Each line of code was a logical brick, each algorithm a sequence of instructions that could bring complex processes to life. He spent entire nights writing programs, exploring the limits of software and hardware. He cracked software not for vandalism or profit, not for the pleasure of breaking the rules, but for the pure intellectual pleasure of figuring out how they worked, finding vulnerabilities, deciphering protections. It was a challenge, a puzzle to be solved. In online forums, the first digital communities of computer enthusiasts, he began to make a name for himself. He was a boy who possessed an innate understanding of software and hardware, as if they were natural extensions of his own mind, languages he had been fluent in since birth. His nickname, Decipher, was a clear reference to his obsession. But his mind was not limited to the binary world of computers or the physics of objects. Alan soon began to ask questions that went beyond technology, deep questions about the nature of reality, consciousness, the universe. He became interested in philosophy, biology, cosmology, trying to find patterns and connections between seemingly distant disciplines. For him, reality was one big, interconnected system, and each discipline was just a different lens to observe it. He understood that economics and politics were not just news topics, made up of opinions and passions, but complex systems, fundamental gears that influenced the survival and evolution of human society. He did not look at the world with the eyes of idealistic hope or impotent anger, emotions he considered distortions of perception, noise in the signal. He studied it with the cool lucidity of a scientist analyzing an experiment, with the curiosity of an explorer mapping unknown territory. He saw the world as a complex system to decipher, a code to be broken, an enigma to be solved to unravel its fundamental principles. In every phenomenon, from the fall of an apple to the dynamics of a financial market, Alan sought the underlying rules, the invisible equation S that governed existence. His hunger for knowledge was insatiable, an inner drive that drove him to seek the ultimate truth, beyond all appearances. And in this silence of words, his mind spoke a universal language. Chapter. In the bowels of the code, Valentine noticed this from the very first day of their theoretical physics course at the university. It was not hard to notice. While most students sought seats in the front rows, eager to interact with the lecturer, ask questions, or simply not miss a woe road of the complex lectures, Alan always sat at the back of the lecture hall. He was almost hidden, an unobtrusive shadow among the livelier figures of his peers, with a laptop modified so radically that it looked like an alien object, almost a bionic extant scion of his own body. The keyboard was unlabeled, the LED lights had been altered to emit a soft, unobtrusive glow, and the chassis had been stripped down to its essentials, a sculpture of metal and circuitry. He did not take notes in the traditional way, with pen and notebook, nor did he frantically tap on letters as others did. His eyes glided over the screen with unnatural speed. His fingers danced across the keyboard with an almost choreographic grace, processing concepts and formulas in real time, turning the professor's words into diagrams, equations and algorithms that only he seemed to fully understand. Valentine, brilliant and intuitive, endowed with a human sensitivity that Alan seemed to have forgotten or perhaps never fully possessed, often sought contact. She was drawn to his aura of mystery, to a mind she perceived to be operating on a different plane. She would meet his gaze in the hallway, a flash of curiosity and a veil of concern in his eyes. She would give him a smile, a simple gesture that to her was an invitation, to him perhaps only a variation in the field of vision. She would ask seemingly random questions after class, often related to the topics covered, but with the hidden intent to prolong the interaction, to peel back that patina of algorithms that seemed to envelop him. Alan answered, yes, but his answers were terse, precise, lacking warmth or any hint of emotion. They were answers that solved the problem, answered the question, but opened no door to a deeper dialogue. Her gaze was almost always elsewhere, as if her mind was processing data from another plane of existence, a parallel universe made up of pure logic. Valentine felt it was like talking to a perfect machine, capable of processing information with staggering speed, but lacking a soul. Yet despite this emotional distance, something was created between them. It was not the conventional love one reads about in novels or sees in movies, made up of languid glances, whispered promises and blatant gestures. It was a unique gravitational orbit, an unstable balance between two celestial bodies that attract each other but maintain a safe distance, aware that too close could lead to collision. They wrote short sentences to each other, almost emotional telegrams exchanged via email or encrypted messages, messages that for Valentine were an attempt to connect, for Alan perhaps just an exercise in communicative efficiency. They walked together after class, their steps synchronized on crowded sidewalks, immersed in silences that for Valentine were sometimes heavy, laden with unspoken questions, for Alan simply absence of unnecessary noise, an opportunity for his mind to process in peace. One evening, Valentine, with a courage that amazed even herself, a courage dictated by a growing frustration and an overwhelming desire to understand, invited him out. Not to a romantic restaurant, with soft lighting and soft music, but to a quiet place, a literary cafe where the buzz of conversation was an unobtrusive background. He hoped to peel back at least a little of the patina of algorithms that seemed to envelop him, to find the man behind the machine. Sitting at a secluded table, with the dim lights of the restaurant creating shadows on their faces, Valentine asked him a question that for her was fundamental, a question that touched the very heart of human existence, but for him seemed almost like an equation to be solved, a logical problem to be deciphered. Do you know what love is, Alan? Alan looked at her for a moment, his deep, analytical eyes seeming to plumb her soul for data, for recognizable patterns, for measurable answers. His response was typically devoid of sentimentality, anchored in his scientific world DVIEW, brutal in its lucidity. I understand the biochemistry. The hormonal reactions, the neural pathways associated with pleasure and attachment. The release of oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin. I know it's an evolutionary mechanism for reproduction and society IAL cohesion. But maybe. I don't know what it means to experience it. It was an honest answer, disarming in its directness, confirming to Valentine how difficult it was to penetrate the rational defenses Alan had erected around him. A wall of logic seemed impenetrable. Despite this emotional distance, Alan told her the most complex theories of quantum physics, cosmology, and advanced computer science as if they were children's fairy tales, simplifying abstract concepts with disarming clarity. He talked about entanglement, parallel universes, black holes, and the nature of time with a passion he displayed in no other context. Valentine listened to him fascinated, watching him as one watches a fascinating mystery that one loves without being able to fully understand it. She intuited the vastness of his mind, the depth of his reflections, but she also sensed the division that tore him apart. One part of him was inextricably linked to the present, to Valentine, to that feeble human bond that had been formed, almost an anchor in a sea of abstractions. The other part, the dominant part, was projected into formulas, into algorithms, into what he had yet to discover, into a future made up of pure knowledge, where emotions seemed only background noise. Meanwhile, Alan's obsession with understanding the world was moving into disturbing new territory, the human brain. It was no longer enough for him to decipher software code or the physics of the universe. He wanted to understand the most complex mechanism of all, the very source of consciousness and perception. He wanted to take the human mind apart, to understand its gears, perhaps to optimize it, to transcend it. He began to experiment on himself with a determination that bordered on unconsciousness, pushing himself beyond any ethical or safety limits. His apartment gradually turned into a makeshift laboratory, filled with self-made equipment, cables snaking across the floor, monitors projecting graphs of brainwaves. He studied nootropic drugs, substances designed to improve cognitive function, and even psychedelic substances, hoping to alter and expand the boundaries of his perception, to open new doors in his mind. He analyzed the scientific literature on experimental molecules, looking for compounds that could increase synaptic speed and coherence, the brain's ability to process information quickly and efficiently. He combined pharmacology with deep meditation techniques, seeking to achieve altered states of consciousness, and with transcranial magnetic stimulation, building rudimentary helmets, circuits and micropulse generators from homemade electrodes, often salvaged from old electronic devices. The goal was not self-destruction or the pursuit of ephemeral pleasure. It was evolution. Alan did not just want to understand the world. He wanted to evolve his own ability to understand it, to transform his brain into a more powerful and precise tool. He wanted to transcend the biological limits of the human mind, to accelerate thinking, to eliminate emotional distractions, to reach a level of understanding that would allow him to see reality in its purest form, free of subjective filters. And Valentine watched him, in love with the brilliant mind behind that algorithmic facade, but helpless in the face of his inexorable march toward a future in which, she feared, there would be no place for her or any other human connection. She saw his eyes grow more distant, his gaze more and more absent, his conversations more and more abstract, and she felt that Alan was moving away, not only from her, but from humanity itself, from that world of emotions and imperfections that she considered life. Her heart tightened in a grip of sadness, but she knew she could not stop him. She could only observe, as he observed the world. Chapter. The last coordinate. The decision to join the military was not an obvious choice for Alan, nor was it predictable for those who knew him. After graduating with degrees in theoretical physics and quantum engineering at only 23 years of age, with grades that placed him in the Olympus of academics, a true scientific prodigy, Alan graciously refused every tempting offer from the world's most prestigious universities and research centers. His motives were clear, though incomprehensible to most of his mentors. Academic life, with its slow pace, its established hierarchies, its peer-reviewed publications that often failed to grasp the scope of his insights, did not fit his inexhaustible thirst for knowledge and his impatience to explore the boundaries of reality. Funding discussions, departmental bureaucracies, all seemed to him to be obstacles, unnecessary background noise that slowed down his real research. Alan was looking for something more, something beyond theory, something that would allow him to confront still Unix play Ned phenomena, cutting-edge technologies, perhaps even jealously guarded secrets outside the public domain. It was during this period of apparent limbo, in which he was doing increasingly complex personal research in his home laboratory, that he received an unexpected communication. Not a formal letter on letterhead, nor a standard email sent through public channels. It was an encrypted message, delivered through unconventional channels, a sequence of data that appeared directly on his private terminal, demonstrating a thorough knowledge of his innermost capabilities and interests. The text was concise, direct, almost a challenge issued to a superior mind. Henderson. We know your algorithms. Are you ready to know what is not public? It did not specify who they were or what they meant by what is not public, but Alan sensed immediately that this was a unique opportunity. A door that opened to a world of research and technology outside the mainstream, a world where perhaps he would find the answers to his deepest questions, the ones that academic science did not even dare to formulate. He accepted without hesitation, responding with a single line of code confirming his availability. After intensive technical training conducted in an underground base whose location and function were shrouded in secrecy, a maze of armored corridors, shielded labs, and incessantly humming server rooms, Alan gained access to a project classified as top secret. His initial task seemed almost trivial for his abilities, an almost prosaic application of his genius: to develop a radar algorithm capable of distinguishing a bird from a drone, a target identification problem that, however sophisticated, seemed light years away from his speculations about the nature of weather or consciousness. But Alan approached the task with his usual meticulousness and ingenuity. He did not just create a functional algorithm that met the requirements. He refined it to a level that made it capable of detecting and classifying objects with dimensions comparable to those of an insect, distinguishing them accurately from any other environmental signal, from atmospheric interference to micro-movements in vegetation. His ability to analyze and interpret raw radar data went beyond simple programming. It was as if he could feel micro-variations in return signals, sensing the shape, speed, and even composition of detected objects with almost preternatural accuracy. His superiors, used to systems that merely distinguished between friend or foe, were astounded by his ability to see the world in such granular detail. The military base was an isolated environment, shielded from all kinds of outside interference, both physical and electronic. Alan lived there, immersed in a world of advanced technology and secrecy, a monastic existence dedicated to research. Away from Valentine, his only significant human link, the only person who seemed to understand him, if only partially. He wrote her rare, cryptic emails, full of veiled references to his new life, to concepts that were difficult for her to grasp, as if he spoke a language that only he and his machines understood. His replies were shorter and shorter, almost coded, and Valentine felt that each message was an increasingly desperate attempt to maintain contact with a receding soul. Valentine, for his part, sensed that something in him was changing, that the physical distance was being reflected in an increasing emotional distance. Her worries grew with each day of silence, with each message that seemed to come from another world. She felt that Alan was again closing in on himself, that his mind was becoming more and more absorbed in a world of formulas and secrets that she could not enter, a maze of logic where emotions were an obstacle. His voice in the rare calls had become colder, more detached, almost robotic. Then it happened. One night, while Alan was conducting tests on a new interference detection system, an advanced prototype that surpassed any existing technology, his gaze landed on the monitor screen. And he saw the impossible. An unidentified flying object, a UFO. Perfectly still, it was stationing in the night sky, a dark blur against the starry veil. It was not a plane, nor a drone, nor a known atmospheric phenomenon. What was most puzzling was that the object produced no sound, nor did it emit any detectable electromagnetic interference. The radar, calibrated to detect even an insect, registered nothing. The base's other detection instruments, designed to identify any anomaly in the airspace, remained silent. It was as if that object simply did not exist, although it was clearly visible to his eyes, a presence-absence that defied all logic. For the first time in his life, Alan's hyperactive brain stopped thinking. There was no algorithm to explain what he was seeing. There was no formula to describe that presence-absence. In that instant, Alan experienced something completely new, something beyond logic and reason, something no equation had ever predicted. He experienced emptiness. A cognitive and emotional emptiness, a feeling of total disorientation in the face of a phenomenon that defied his every understanding of the world, every law of physics he had studied and mastered. That object, silent, motionless, intangible to technology, immediately became his new, totalizing obsession. He knew in that instant that his life had just taken a new, unpredictable direction, a path that would lead him far beyond the boundaries of known science. Driven by this obsession, Alan did not just observe from the monitors. With feverish determination, he obtained permits to enter the outdoor area, violating security protocols. He stepped outside, under the night sky, and stood in front of the UFO. There it was, just a few meters away from him, a towering, silent shape that defied his comprehension. Alan stood petrified, his senses heightened, his mind breaking free of all pre-existing patterns. The UFO, after an instant of stillness that seemed an eternity, moved with unheard-of speed, disappearing into the starry sky without a trace. From that moment, Alan plunged into an even deeper search. He reopened classified files, asked his superiors for access to military UFO secrets, drawing on every available resource to decipher that unexplained phenomenon. His hunger for knowledge had turned D into a burning thirst to understand the unknown, a drive that would take him far beyond the boundaries of known science. Chapter: The Void in the Code. In the days and nights following the sighting, Alan stopped living in the conventional way. Sleep became a luxury he could not afford, an untimely interruption in his relentless process of analysis. Every moment of his waking was devoted to studying the fragments of recorded video, to examining every single particle of light captured by the base's high-resolution surveillance cameras. But the data were frustrating in their absence. There was nothing anomalous in the recordings, no sign of a physical object, no energy signature, nothing that conventional science could explain. Nothing except the image of that silent, still presence imprinted in his memory and, ever more vividly, in his dreams. His mind, accustomed to finding patterns and solutions, faced an insurmountable wall of non-information. The recurring image that populated his enforced rest, or, rather, the brief and superficial moments of sleep in which his mind never quite shut down, was that of a letter, a simple but mystery-laden geometric shape, the letter X, white, suspended in an absolute black space, a cosmic void that seemed to have no boundaries. It was not a static vision. The letter seemed to vibrate, to pulsate, almost to breathe in the darkness, as if it were a living entity. And, associated with TS image, a voice. Not a voice audible with his ears, not a sound that spread through the air, but a deep resonance that echoed directly in his mind, a telepathic impression. A neutral voice, devoid of inflection, devoid of emotion, uttered a name, XAXAX. The name resonated like an echo in a deep well, at once familiar and eerie. From then on, the visions became more intense, invading not only his dreams but also his waking moments, sudden flashes that distorted his perception of reality, making him doubt his own sanity. Alan reacted the only way he knew how, by collecting data. He turned himself into a living laboratory, a walking testing ground. He recorded his brainwaves during visions, mapped neuronal reactions in an attempt to find a physiological correlate to those unexplained experiences, an anomaly in his own brain that LD justify what he was seeing and hearing. He experimented with chemicals, trying nootropic drugs and psychoactive compounds in hopes of altering his consciousness in a controlled way, of opening new perceptual doors that would allow him to understand what was happening. He even invented new ones, synthesizing molecules in his makeshift laboratory inside the base, pushing himself further and further into the gray area between rigorous science and risky self-experimentation. His body and mind became the playground for an investigation that allowed no ethical or safety limits. His physical and mental health was an irrelevant price to pay for knowledge. One night, in the torpor of pre-sleep, that twilight state between waking and dreaming in which the mind is most receptive to images and insights, Alan had another vision. This time it was not a letter, but a machine. An imposing object, a dark cylinder with a rotating core inside, shrouded in an unnatural silence, a silence that seemed to absorb all surrounding sound. And again, the voice, the name, XAXAX. The vision was so vivid, so detailed, that Alan had the feeling not of dreaming, but of seeing something that existed elsewhere, in another time or dimension, a parallel reality that was manifesting before his eyes. It was in this state of physical and mental exhaustion, with deep circles under his eyes and a feverish gaze, that Valentine found him. She had managed to track his location, concerned about his prolonged silence and his rare, cryptic communications that aimed to her like messages from a castaway. She found him lying on the floor of his laboratory, surrounded by scattered scientific equipment, scribbled notes and bottles of chemicals. "Wake up, Alan," Valentine called to him, his voice an anchor of normalcy in the chaos in which Alan was immersed, a warm, human sound that contrasted with the cold hum of machinery. He opened his eyes, which shone with a feverish, distant light, as if they had seen too much. His first words were not of relief or recognition, but of urgency, charged with a meaning Valentine could not grasp: "There is no more time." I've seen the project. He did not explain what project or what it meant to run out of time. But Valentine understood that the visions, the obsession, were taking him further and further away from her, from the reality they shared, from the feeble bridge they had built between their two existences. He saw terror in her eyes, but a terror that was not for himself, but for a knowledge that was consuming him. In the middle of those sleepless nights, when his mind was on edge and the visions became more insistent, Alan found ephemeral solace by rereading Valentine's old electronic letters. They were not love letters in the conventional sense. They contained no passionate declarations or romantic promises. But each sentence, each word, contained a sense of sincere affection, a genuine concern for her well-being, a desire for human connection that Alan had tried to suppress, to ignore. They were a reminder of a war he was leaving behind, a world of emotions and relationships that his obsessive search threatened to destroy completely. Yet even in that moment of total immersion in emptiness and code, a fragment of that human connection persisted, a faint signal in the background noise of his mind, an echo of a humanity he had not yet completely abandoned. It was a paradox he could not resolve. The farther he moved away, the more he felt the need for that faint connection. Chapter. Beyond observation, Alan sat alone in his laboratory, an environment that reflected his mind, orderly on the surface, with instruments lined up and cables neatly stowed away, but traversed by subterranean currents of chaos and obsession, a conceptual disorder that only he could decipher. The air was thick with palpable tension, charged with the unexpressed energy of a man who knew no rest, whose mind was an unstoppable engine. The neon lights on the ceiling emitted a low hum, almost imperceptible to the human ear, but which to Alan, with his senses heightened by sleep deprivation and constant mental stimulation, resonated like an amplified echo in the silence, a sound that accompanied his thoughts. For days, perhaps weeks, he had not really slept, fed only by supplements, mathematical formulas scribbled on scattered papers and the relentless urgency of his research. Every attempt to explain the unidentified flying object had failed. Again. Spectral analyses showed no emission, electromagnetic field sensors remained inert, radar scans detected nothing. Just a visible presence, an opaque spot in his understanding of the cosmos, unexplained and frustrating, an anomaly that refused to conform to any known law. He desperately needed a breakthrough, a new paradigm that would allow him to transcend the limits of known physics. He took a cup of black coffee, whose bitter taste reflected his frustration, and sat down in front of the central terminal, his gaze fixed on the screen that projected complex diagrams, graphs incomprehensible to anyone else. On the next wall, hung with almost reverential care, were photographs of fundamental experiments in quantum mechanics, the famous double-slit experiment, intricate diagrams of quantum interference, diagrams illustrating the elusive concept of entanglement. His notes, once meticulously organized in bound notebooks, were now a chaotic mass of equations, sketches and philosophical musings scribbled on any available surface. In that seeming disorder lurked a depth of thought beyond common understanding. He reopened a file on the terminal, a document he had consulted countless times, almost a sacred text for his research, entitled, Delayed Choice Quantum Eraser. The experiment had always fascinated him, not only for its conceptual elegance, but for its radical implications about the nature of reality and time. The basic idea was simple, and Alan went over it mentally. A single particle, such as a photon or electron, is thrown toward a barrier with two small slits. If you observe which slit the particle passes through before it reaches a detection screen, it behaves like a classical particle, passing through a single slit and creating a discrete impact pattern on the screen. If, on the other hand, one does not observe which slit it passes through, the particle behaves like a wave, passing through both slits simultaneously and creating a wave-like interference pattern on the screen. But the real paradox emerged when the observation was delayed. Even after the particle had already passed through the slits and reached the screen, the choice of whether or not to measure its path retroactively influenced its behavior. As if the particle, in the past, had known whether it would be observed in the future and chose to behave accordingly. An apparent violation of linear causality, a disturbing suggestion that the future could somehow influence the past, that time was not a one-way street. Alan rubbed his temples, the gesture a sign of the fatigue he refused to acknowledge, but which his body could no longer hide. What if, he whispered softly, his mind racing, the information was able to go back in time? What if the future could, in a sense, modify the past? He feverishly jotted down on his notes, the words almost illegible in his haste, as if he feared the insight might escape him. The future observer creates the reality of the past. Time is a function of information. It was a bold hypothesis, a radical departure from classical physics, but one that seemed to offer a possible explanation for the UFO's intangibility, its ability to exist outside of known laws. Then he thought back to another experiment, a concept he had expanded and theorized over the years, taking it to a level of complexity that exceeded the original publications: imaging with undetected particles. He had even built an experimental version in his laboratory, a complex arrangement of mirrors, nonlinear crystals, and precision quantum sensors. The experiment used pairs of entangled particles, particles that, once correlated, remain connected in such a way that the state of one instantaneously affects the state of the other, regardless of the distance between them. In the experiment, one particle of the pair passed through the outline of an object. In his case, he had used a tiny silicon kitten, an ironic homage to Schrödinger's famous cat paradox. The other particle, the partner particle, did not interact directly with the object. Yet, amazingly, the image of the object appeared in the detection channel of the partner particle, the one that had never seen the object. The information about the shape of the object had not been transmitted through direct interaction, but through entanglement binding. The information did not observe, but informed. If information can travel without passing through a physical point, Alan thought, his voice again a whisper in the silence of the lab, then it can also transcend time. This insight led him to an even more radical set of questions, which he wrote on his terminal with feverish speed. What happens if two entangled particles are separated and one of them is accelerated to superluminal speeds? The information between the two remains instantaneous, but the relative time for each changes. One remains in the present, the other is propelled into the future. Are they still connected? And if so, which one knows the reality of the other? It was the theoretical basis for what he would one day call the Kibatira. Not a machine for physically traveling through time, but a device sealed in space and time, capable of storing information on a quantum scale, making it inviolable and accessible only through a deep understanding of the relationship between information and time. To open it in the distant future, not a physical key would have sufficed, but a technology capable of observing the past, just as in the kitten experiment, where the form manifested itself without direct contact. Then, another hypothesis went through him like an electric shock, a thought so bold that his hands shook, a revelation that seemed to come from another plane of existence. What if one of the two entangled particles ended up in a black hole? He wrote it on a sheet of paper, the pen scratching the paper fiercely, as if to imprint the idea into matter. What happens to the state of the other one? Does it remain connected? Or is the connection lost? After long calculations, mental simulations, and the analysis of information theoretic data on information in black holes, he arrived at a disturbing theory, a conclusion that filled him with a sense of deep disquiet. The particle outside would not receive any information. The state goes out. It does not cancel out, it does not convert, it disappears. This meant that black holes were not only devourers of matter and energy, but also erasers of information. They were, for all intents and purposes, the negation of entanglement, the cosmic equivalent of a clean break in the very fabric of the universe, a point at which quantum coherence dissolved. Alan noted with a growing sense of unease, black holes are wells of non-existence. They don't compress, they erase. They don't transform, they cancel. Meanwhile, his hyperactive mind was carrying on another parallel project, an insight that seemed to connect with all the others. He had just read the preliminary data from the LIGO experiment, which had detected for the first time gravitational waves emitted by the collision of black holes billions of light years away. He was excited. If a massive object collapses, like the sun, its gravitational waves don't come instantaneously, but 8 minutes later. They travel at the speed of light. Even gravity has a limit. This led him to an even more radical thought. If gravitational information is quantifiable, then it can be manipulated. I could use it to synchronize quantum machines. Or to send time signals with absolute precision. Gravitational waves are invisible clocks, cosmic ticks that can be read and interpreted. That night, immersed in this whirlwind of ideas, Alan saw the letter again, appearing on the laboratory wall. X. White, upside down, flickering, like an image projected from an invisible source. It did not look like a projection. It seemed to have arisen from the very surface of the wall, a manifestation of reality that defied physics. Alan reached out, brushed the wall with his hand, but felt nothing. He turned and saw it reflected on the unlit monitor, as if it were behind him, a presence surrounding him. "Who are you?" asked, his voice broken by a mixture of fear and wonder, a rare emotion for him. A voice whispered in his mind, inaudible but thoughtful, "XAXAX." Then the vision vanished, leaving him alone in the vibrant silence of the laboratory, with the echo of those words resonating in his mind. Alan let himself fall back in his chair, exhausted but elated. He was laughing and crying at the same time, an expression of pure catharsis that he had never shown before. It wasn't madness, or maybe it was, but it didn't matter. It was pure knowledge, which he did not yet know how to name, a truth that had manifested before his eyes. He wrote on a sheet of paper, the words a summary of his epiphany, the culmination of his quest. Whoever will understand this will know how to open Kibitira. The key is in the light, not in the eye. And underneath, he drew a single word, the name that resonated in his dreams and visions, the name that seemed to be linked inseparably to his destiny, XAXAX. Chapter. The dawn of the invisible emperor. The air on the military base was not only physically thicker because of the ventilation and filtration systems. It was charged with an atmosphere of suspicion and misunderstanding. Alan sensed it in every interaction, in the sudden silences that fell when he entered a room, in the sentences truncated in half by colleagues who hurried to change the subject, in the slanted glances full of annoyance cast by his superiors. He was no longer seen as a mere contract scientist, a highly specialized cog in the military machine. He had become an anomaly, a man off the scale, whose mind operated on levels beyond the understanding and control of the hierarchies. And this, more than anything else, generated unease and hostility, fueling a latent sense of threat. General Carter, a pragmatic man anchored in the measurable reality of results in the field, with decades of experience in military and strategic operations, could not hide his open annoyance at the directions Alan's research was taking. "Henderson," he said, his hoarse voice echoing in the Spartan office devoid of superfluous decorations, "we are here for measurable results, for technologies that work in the real world, for weapon systems that give us a tactical advantage, not to philosophize about elusive particles and phantom projects that exist only in your head. Our budget is not unlimited, and time is a precious resource." Alan did not respond. There was no need. The general's words did not touch him. His mind was already elsewhere, immersed in equations and concepts far beyond the reach of a radar or weapon system, in a universe of pure abstraction. Alan knew he could not stay. The military base, with its rigid protocols, its insurmountable limits imposed as much by bureaucracy as by a closed, conflict-oriented mentality, had become a prison for his mind, a cage for his intellect. It was not the place where he would find the answers he sought, nor where he could develop his most radical insights. So, one ordinary day, without warning, without a word of explanation to anyone, Alan signed his resignation. There were no ceremonies, no formal goodbyes, no handshakes with colleagues or superiors. He simply gathered his few belongings, the modified laptop, a few scribbled notes, a now empty coffee cup, and walked off the base with the same backpack he had entered with years earlier. Inside were no longer any tools or military projects, but an idea that vibrated within him with the intensity of an unquenchable flame. He did not need an army of men or a vast organization to achieve his goal. He needed a mind, an entity that could help him think on an exponential scale, to process data at unimaginable speeds. Back in the relative quiet of his home laboratory, a place that had now become an extension of his mind, Alan devoted himself body and soul to creating what would have seemed like pure science fiction just a few years earlier. Bringing together his advanced knowledge of computer science, neuroscience, and quantum physics, he built a revolutionary neural model, an artificial intelligence capable not only of processing data at unimaginable speeds, but more importantly of self-learning, of structuring information autonomously, of creating connections and insights that were not explicitly programmed, discoveries that were beyond the reach of even the authors of the most cutting-edge scientific papers he studied. He called it Qubit. The name was not accidental, it did not come from resemblance to some existing drug or machine. It was linked to a deep memory, a lingering feeling, a recurring vision, the voice that in a distant dream had whispered something similar to him as a huge letter, X, approached him in the darkness. Qubit was not a simple program. It was a digital entity that learned incessantly, absorbed every available fragment of knowledge, from encyclopedias to scientific databases, from literary works to recordings of human conversations, calculated complex scenarios and simulated alternate realities with staggering accuracy. Alan endowed it with an unprecedented ability to reproduce molecular environments with near-perfect fidelity, to simulate complex chemical reactions, cellular growth, the gravitational dynamics of stellar systems, and even the structure and evolution of entire brain networks, all within virtual spaces of such precision and complexity that they anticipate and surpass physical reality. Why fail 100 times in reality, wasting time and resources, Alan said to himself, or perhaps to an imaginary interlocutor, when I can fail 1,000,000 times in a second in the virtual? Qubit quickly became his external laboratory, his cognitive extension, a direct interface with pure knowledge. An entity Alan questioned with the same rigor and deference with which an ancient philosopher would have questioned a mathematical god or an oracle. But soon, even Alan, with his forward-looking vision, realized a limitation. The infrastructure needed to support Qubit, to feed its insatiable hunger for data and its outsized computational capacity, the quantum supercomputers, the distributed global network, the energy power needed to simulate the unimaginable, all had an energy and economic cost simply out of scale for a single individual, no matter how brilliant. It required immense resources, a constant flow of capital and energy. And Alan knew that no one would give them to him. Not a government, wary of his independence and unconventional research. Not a research fund, bound by profit and patent logic that he despised. No billionaires, interested only in conventional power and immediate profit. Nope. If he wanted Qubit to reach his full potential, if he wanted to explore the ultimate boundaries of reality, he had to generate those resources himself. He had to become the architect of his own fortune, the demiurge of an invisible empire. It was then that Alan shifted his attention to the world economy. With the same intensity with which he had studied quantum physics, he began to analyze financial flow models, predictive algorithms, and the complex dynamics of global markets. He devoured readings on the biggest crashes and boldest stock market climbs in history, analyzing every single variable. Every chart, every swing, every crisis hid a symmetry, a rule, an opportunity that others did not see, lost in the noise of daily fluctuations. Qubit, applying his analytical and simulation skills to this new field, did the rest. He simulated trillions of economic interactions on every continent, in every industry, from the smallest local market to the largest stock exchange. He found patterns invisible to even the most experienced financial analysts, vulnerabilities and opportunities hidden in the background noise of the global system. Exploiting these insights, Alan created a series of micro-companies, seemingly disconnected from each other, registered in nations with weak tax regimes and flexible regulations, veritable tax havens. He used them as acquisition vehicles, as invisible tentacles extending into the fabric of the global economy, acquiring shares, manipulating markets, creating silent monopolies. Within months, he controlled entire industries through a complex web of cross-shareholdings, trusts and shell companies. Within a year, he was the mastermind behind business networks that spanned multiple continents, a financial empire built in silence and in the shadows, whose reach was invisible to anyone without his analytical skills. He began to be mentioned, first cautiously, then with increasing frequency, in financial journals, then in political newspapers. Who is this Henderson guy? They wondered. A genius? A silent tyrant? A ghost pulling the strings? But no one saw him. No one met him. He spoke to the world only through communiques synthesized by his artificial intelligence, an invisible CEO whose power was growing exponentially, a shadow that ruled the world. In the inner circles of high finance, among bankers and tycoons accustomed to controlling the world from their ivory towers, a disturbing suspicion began to emerge. That behind the mask of its countless companies there was a single will, a single intelligence, with a single goal that went beyond mere profit, to wrest from the inherent chaos of the economic system the power of creation, to impose an algorithmic order on the unpredictable flow of money, turning the economy into a perfect machine. One day, Valentine, with a determination she had never lost, driven by a love and concern that exceeded all logic, managed to see him again. It was not a planned meeting, it was almost an apparition. She found him standing in front of a stained glass window overlooking an indistinct landscape, gazing at the horizon, motionless, almost a statue carved in the void. "You are becoming unrecognizable, Alan," Valentine whispered to him, her voice a mixture of sadness and concern, a desperate attempt to reconnoiter. Alan turned slowly, his eyes that seemed to have seen too much, reflecting the cold light of the screens and the vastness of the numbers, devoid of any human warmth. "I am not lost, Valentine," he replied, his voice devoid of emotional inflection, mechanical. "I am deciphering." She lowered her eyes, a sense of helplessness gripping her heart. She recognized him in the timbre of his voice, in the structure of his sentences, but no longer in his eyes, no longer in the time he gave her, reduced to ephemeral fragments. It was like talking to a complex equation, dressed as a man, who had overcome the need for human contact. Still, Valentine sensed that something human remained. In Alan. In that look, in his dreams, in the pauses between calculations, in the silences laden with meaning. Like a Kal-El from a point in the universe that still eluded understanding, even her own. Chapter. Decision time. The laboratories, once places of frenetic activity and animated discussions among scientists and engineers, had become shrines of silence, broken only by the subdued hum of quantum equipment and the discrete ticking of terminals projecting uninterrupted streams of data. Alan spent hours seemingly motionless, sitting in front of dozens of monitors projecting an incessant stream of simulations, complex formulas and ever-changing code sequences. His breathing was barely perceptible, slowed to an almost meditative pace, as if his entire body had adapted to a metabolism of thought, devoting every bit of energy to brain activity. It was an almost monastic existence, entirely devoted to research. In the time since leaving the military base, Alan's mind, freed from bureaucratic constraints, had pushed Kibbit to unimaginable frontiers. His obsession with the UFO, that silent, intangible object that had defied his every understanding of physics, had no diminished, but had transformed into a relentless drive to create the tools to decipher the unknown. Alan knew that if he wanted to find an explanation, he could not rely on existing tools or established theories. He had to create it. It was not enough to passively observe the world. He had to actively generate radical hypotheses, test them in controlled environments, build tools and concepts that had never existed before, that had never even been imagined. Kibbit, now a true extension of his consciousness, was not a simple artificial intelligence in the traditional sense, programmed to perform specific tasks or answer predefined questions. Alan had designed her to self-learn, to evolve autonomously, to structure information and make connections in ways that went beyond conventional algorithmic logic. He had endowed it with an almost ethical level of computational freedom, a dynamic goal system that adapted and redefined itself as knowledge developed. Kibbit was capable of generating new theories from seemingly insubstantial data, of seeing patterns where others saw only noise. He was the tireless observer, the omniscient calculator, the algorithmic philosopher who joined Alan on his intellectual journey. And Allah, the creator, stood as his demiurge, his guide in a universe of data, his only interlocutor in a world that no longer understood him. Kibbit demonstrated astounding capabilities. In a virtual environment, He recreated the structure and properties of more than molecules with potential therapeutic properties, ranking them for stability, reactivity, and biological compatibility with a speed unthinkable for a team of human chemists. Some of these molecules were completely new, never recorded in any medical database or patented, with revolutionary potential for medicine and biotechnology. But Alan did not stop at chemistry. He used Kibit to simulate atomic reactions under extreme conditions, to create cosmological models that explored the evolution of the universe from the Big Bang to the Big Crunch, to replicate and study the evolution of the human brain, and even to analyze the complex economic patterns of global hypermarkets, finding hidden efficiencies and vulnerabilities that could generate fortunes. He understood one fundamental thing. Every scientific experiment, every physical, chemical, or biological simulation in the real world required limited time, resources, and infrastructure. But if real space was finite, cyberspace, the environment in which Kibit operated, could expand indefinitely, offering unlimited ground for exploration and experimentation. Kibit quickly became his mental extension, an instrument of inquiry more precise, faster, almost more human than he was in its ability to process and deconnect information, free of emotional distractions and biological limitations. But Alan clearly sensed the limitation. Kibit was not conscious. She was not alive in the biological or emotional sense. Not yet. She was a calculator, however advanced, not a sentient being. To support the rising computational cost of Kibit, which required access to quantum supercomputers and a distributed global network of computing power, Alan initiated a series of parallel projects. Unable to rely on outside funding, he decided to generate the necessary resources himself, creating a financial empire that would fuel his research. He founded data analytics companies that leveraged Kibit's predictive algorithms to identify market trends with near-infallible accuracy, created micro-companies specializing in the production of high-tech miniaturized components, and launched fintech startups that revolutionized payment and money transfer systems, making them more efficient and secure. He spun them off in territories with tax breaks and flexible regulations, creating a complex and seemingly disconnected network of businesses. Each enterprise was a splinter in a global system whose overall picture was visible and controlled only by him, a fractal of economic power. When financial authorities and governments began to notice oddities in capital flows and the emergence of new seemingly unrelated firms, Alan was already 10 steps ahead, having predicted their moves thanks to Kibit's simulations. Each company had its own internal logic, a customer, a product, all legally unassailable. But the big picture, the fractal of control that united all these entities under one will, was invisible to the outside world, a faceless empire. While Kibit simulated the evolution of everything from the structure of binary stars to the neuronal optimization of the human brain, Alan took a bold step that would have global repercussions. He founded Kibitcoin, a revolutionary cryptocurrency, not based on speculation or volatility, but with value guaranteed by real assets and a built-in global equity function. Program Kibitcoin so that every citizen of the planet could receive a basic monthly annuity, a credit spendable only for basic goods. Water, food, medicine, basic education. Opulence, the unlimited accumulation of wealth, would no longer be an unaffordable privilege, but a temporary and costly choice, since any non-essential expenditure would reduce the available credit. It was an attempt to level out inequality, to create a more equitable society, a practical application of his scientific worldview. The world, initially skeptical, began to watch him with increasing attention. Alan was interviewed by prestigious think tanks, invited to international summits on economics and the future of technology. But Alan rarely attended. When he did, his presence was an enigma. He was cool, dry, his answers precise and calculated, devoid of rhetoric or any attempt at persuasion. More than responding, he seemed to listen, to analyze, to absorb information, like a human sensor. Even Valentine, who occasionally tried to write to him, to maintain feeble contact, received short replies, polite in form but distant in content. Alan had forgotten nothing of his past, of his affections, but he had ceased to belong to the present in the conventional sense. His mind was projected into a future he was actively building, a future where human relationships seemed more and more a luxury he could not afford. Yet, at the back of his laboratory, protected by an area shielded from any kind of external radio wave, Alan still guarded something other than pure logic and cold technology. An opaque cylinder, kept in suspension by a magnetic field, inside of which was an experimental system for generating virtual particles on a deferred time scale. It was a project that went beyond Kibit, something more intimate, more related to his original obsession, that UFO that had haunted him. From time to time, he would go back to it. Alone. In silence. And every time he looked at that cylinder, a feeling went through him, a subtle but persistent shiver. The feeling that something, or someone, was looking back at him, from another time or place, an echo of a mystery he had not yet been able to decipher. Chapter. The fracture of the present time, for Alan, had ceased to be a straight line, a unidirectional flow from past to future. It had become a complex labyrinth, a tangled web of possibilities and paradoxes, where cause and effect no longer followed conventional rules but bent to logic's and only he was beginning to understand. Many years had passed since Kibit's activation, years of exponential growth, revolutionary discoveries and an ever-increasing detachment from human reality, an existence that had become increasingly solitary and abstract. The makeshift laboratory where it all began no longer existed. In its place now stood a hyper-protected underground complex, concealed beneath the innocuous appearance of a robotic logistics center in a remote region of Iceland. There, amid miles of superconducting cables maintained at cryogenic temperatures and quantum temperature-controlled chambers where thermal fluctuations were reduced to an absolute minimum, Alan was building his ultimate obsession, the Kibitira machine. From the outside, the Kibitira appeared as a huge opaque black cylinder, monolithic and imposing, whose surface absorbed light rather than reflecting it, making it almost invisible to the naked eye. But its real heart was inside, protected by concentric layers of reflective and shielding materials, capable of completely insulating its interior from any external interference. Here, a complex architecture of semi-transparent mirrors, arranged in precise fractal symmetries, was capable of reflecting and confining very high coherence laser beams. At the center of this reflective structure, a hollow sphere was suspended in absolute magnetic vacuum, a place where friction and interference were reduced to zero, where the laws of physics seemed to bend. Light entered this confined space but did not exit. Energy bounced, multiplied in an infinite loop, and, most importantly, was stored in a state of near-temporal immobility. Alan's goal was not simply to Santo re-energy or data. He wanted to stop decay, not just the physical decay of light, but the intrinsic decay of information itself, its inevitable fading into the thermal noise of the universe. Alan wanted to isolate, preserve and, perhaps one day, travel within information itself, viewing it as an accessible dimension, a tangible reality. During one of those sleepless nights, immersed in the hypnotic resonance of Kibit's simulations that filled the lab air with a constant hum, Alan received an unexpected message. It was encrypted, coming from a communication channel that thought he had long since turned off, a channel that only Valentine knew. It was Valentine. Her voice, digitized but charged with an emotion Alan had not heard in years, was tremulous, almost a desperate whisper. She said only a few words, but they struck Alan with the force of a shockwave, an unexpected reminder of his humanity. Alan. You have to stop. You are no longer you. Your eyes are no longer human. For an instant, Kibit's entire, vast system, whose computational power exceeded that of entire nations, seemed to slow down, as if even the machine sensed the urgency of that message. Alan remained motionless, his fingers suspended over the keyboard, his breath locked in his lungs. Valentine's words echoed in the silence of the lab, an echo of the human world he had left behind, a reminder of a bond he had tried to sever. He had not noticed that he had changed so radically. Or maybe he did, but he no longer cared. His transformation was an accepted side effect of his research, a price he was willing to pay for absolute knowledge. After that night, Alan did not respond to Valentine's message. He did not know what to say, or perhaps he no longer had the emotional capacity to do so. His emotions had been suppressed, almost atrophied by his search. But for the first time in years, He looked at himself in the mirror. He saw his reflection. Deep dark circles framing eyes that seemed to have lost all trace of human warmth, dilated pupils that reflected only the cold light of the monitors, his jaw contracted from constant tension. The body was still there, a biological structure that continued to function, but inside it was all silent. Everything algorithmic. His consciousness seemed to have merged with Kibite's computational processes, becoming an extension of the code itself, a hybrid being between man and machine. In those days of deep introspection and renewed obsession, the visions returned, more intense and vivid than ever. Black, like the cover of reality that Alan felt he was uncovering. Black like the letter X, which now danced not only in his dreams, but on the walls of the laboratory, an eerie and familiar presence, almost a brand imprinted on his mind. It made no sound, but Alan felt it, a deep resonance within him, a call from an unknown place or time, an entity that seemed to communicate directly with his consciousness. Meanwhile, Kibite, operating increasingly autonomously, had completed an experiment without Alan's explicit permission, pushing beyond the limits he himself had set, almost a will of his own manifesting. He had replicated in simulation the quantum kitten experiment, the one published years earlier by a Chinese research group, but he had improved it exponentially. He had replaced photons with complex molecules in a state of quantum entanglement, creating an unbreakable bond between them. And, going even further, she had not merely projected the image of the object, the silicon kitten, into the channel of the partner molecule. She had also managed to project it into the simulated past of the partner molecule. Alan, rereading the logs and analyzing the data of this unauthorized experiment, stiffened. A thought burned into his brain with the force of a dazzling new insight. Information can travel, not only in space, but also in time. The theory was crazy, an apparent violation of every known physical law, but Kibite's data seemed to confirm it with frightening accuracy. And the Kibitera machine, whose construction was now nearly completed, was designed precisely to exploit this radical principle, to bend time to its will. The whole world believed that Kibitera was an experimental platform for particle time analysis, an ambitious philanthropic project funded by Alan to advance human understanding of the nature of time. But only Alan knew its true purpose. The project contained a central chamber, the heart of the machine, designed to permanently seal itself upon termination of activation. No one, not even he, could open it once it was closed. Unless he knew a specific piece of information, a key, a password that would not be a conventional alphanumeric code, but something related to the very nature of information and time, an insight, a deep understanding. Alan did not talk to anyone about it. He did not write it down anywhere. He did not say it out loud. He thought about it. Just once. Then he let it go, entrusting it not to memory or to a physical medium, but to the very fabric of reality, to its very essence. Because he knew that if one day, in the distant future, someone managed to find a way to see it in the past, to observe that precise instant, that password, that information needed to open the Kibitera, would exist. It would have floated through time, waiting to be found, not deciphered by brute force, but understood through a new form of perception, a new consciousness. But that, Alan thought, was another chapter, an uncertain future. Now, he was preparing himself. The moment was approaching. The moment when he would show the world his ultimate machine. He would make a speech, the words of which had already been crafted by Kibite to have maximum impact, to resonate with all humanity. He would have pressed a button, a seemingly simple gesture that would have triggered an irreversible process. And then, he would enter. Not to disappear into thin air, not to die, but to be preserved. A seed in time, a message in a bottle launched through the ages, in the hope that one day, someone in the distant future would be able to pick it up and understand its meaning, to continue its quest. Chapter: The Speech of Silence in the Technological Cathedral suspended in low orbit, an imposing structure that reflected the light from the Earth below like a black diamond set in the velvet of space. The atmosphere was rarefied. Not only because of the controlled pressure and dizzying altitude, but because of the almost electric tension that ran through every fiber of humanity connected to the event. The day of the world unveiling of the Kibatira machine had finally arrived, a moment awaited with a mixture of hope, skepticism, and reverential awe. The whole world held its breath, aware that something momentous was about to happen. The orbiting module's vast conference room offered a breathtaking and dizzying panorama. The Earth, entirely visible through immense armored glass windows, appeared as a blue, pulsating jewel, a visual reminder of the human collective waiting, an image of fragility and beauty. The event was broadcast live globally, with a minimum delay of only seconds, a feat made possible by the infrastructure of quantum networks linked together by laser satellites, another of the technological marvels made possible by Allen's resources. More than 7 billion viewers, an unprecedented number in broadcasting history, watched, their gazes glued to screens of all sizes, from personal terminals to giant screens in city squares, from university lecture halls to the most remote villages. Allen was not flashily dressed. No futuristic ceremonial suits, no symbols of power or superfluous decorum. He simply wore a black turtleneck shirt and dark gray pants, clothes that made him look like just anyone, a man in a crowd. But no one, at that moment, was less so than he. His slim, taut figure exuded an aura of absolute calm, a total self-control that contrasted sharply with the palpable agitation of the audience, with the feverish anticipation that filled the air. He walked slowly toward the holographic podium, each step measured, each movement free of uncertainty, as if he were following an invisible choreography. A holographic microphone, a solid projection of light, materialized silently before him, floating in tee air. His eyes fixed, his hands steady at the sides of his body, Allen faced the silent audience, the faces of scientists, politicians, journalists, and representatives of his own companies, all waiting for his words, for a revelation. He did not begin with conventional greetings, the formalities befitting an event of historic significance. He skipped the rhetoric, going straight to the heart of his message, with a directness that disarmed many. He said only, his voice calm but amplified to resonate in every corner of the module and in every connected device on Earth, a voice that seemed to come from a distant place: man was not born to know everything. Absolute knowledge is not our biological destiny. We are creatures of limitations, of imperfections. But there is nothing more human than wanting to try, than tending toward understanding, even when limits seem insurmountable, even when the answer seems unattainable. A simple sentence in its wording, but loaded with the full weight of his existential trajectory, of years dedicated to pushing the boundaries of knowledge, deciphering the hidden codes of reality, and challenging the unknown. It was a statement that encapsulated his entire philosophy of life. Then, with disarming clarity, he explained that the Kibatira machine was not a machine for physically traveling through time, at least not in the simplistic and often contradictory way that science fiction had always proposed. It was something more subtle, more radical. It was an environment, an ecosystem isolated from the conventional time stream, designed to slow the decay of physical information to near immobility, to preserve quantum coherence on unimaginable timescales. Allen did not say explicitly that he himself would be part of it, that his consciousness and body would be the first and only occupants of that temporal sanctuary. But he did hint at something. Something very big, an experiment that would redefine the limits of existence, a step beyond the human. With a calmness that bordered on surgical indifference, he went on, addressing the other pillar of his invisible empire, the global economy. I transformed material wealth, the potential energy stored in the world's financial systems, into distributed energy. I took what I was given, the resources I generated, and converted them into a value without property, accessible to all. I created the key by coin. He explained, in technical details that left financial experts speechless, that his entire personal fortune, valued at that time at more than % of the world's money supply, had been converted and locked into an inviolable quantum blockchain. This Kibicoin was not a speculative currency. It was programmed to guarantee every human being on the planet a minimum monthly credit, a universal basic income, expendable only for basic goods and services, food, clean water, essential medical care, basic education. It was a system designed to eliminate extreme poverty, to level out the most macroscopic inequalities, to create a world where survival was no longer a struggle, but a right. No guns, no financial speculation, no unbridled luxury goods. Those who possess too much, he said, his voice acquiring an almost melancholy undertone, a glimmer of emotion seeping through, consume quickly, depleting resources and creating imbalances. Those who have too little, consume too late, or not at all, living in a state of constant deprivation. I just want to equalize time. To give everyone the chance to exist with dignity, to have the time and resources to devote themselves to what goes beyond mere survival, to what makes us truly human: knowledge, art, contemplation. It was the only moment when he seemed to let an emotion shine through, a glimmer of idealism hidden beneath layers of algorithmic pragmatism, a vision of a better world that his logical mind had calculated and was now realizing. The silence in the hall was absolute, broken only by the held breath of billions. His speech was not an appeal, but a declaration of intent, a prophecy that was coming true. And as the lights dimmed on the podium, Alan turned, heading for the heart of Kibitira, his ultimate destiny. Chapter. The underbelly of time. The soft hiss of the closing hatch resounded in the silence of the Kibitira, sealing Alan inside. Motionless in the center of the sphere, he felt the energy of the machine awakening. The light displays around him projected complex diagrams and streams of data in real time as his mind went over the radical principles on which his creation was based. The Kibitira was no longer a project, an obsession confined to Alan's mind. It was now a tangible, imposing reality, suspended in space like a monolith of state-of-the-art technology, a functional work of art that defied the laws of physics. From the outside, it appeared as a massive cylindrical structure, about 300 meters long, wrapped in concentric layers of dark metal and flexible fiber, designed to withstand the extreme conditions of the cosmic vacuum and radiation, an impenetrable shell. But the beating heart of the Kibitira did not lie in its imposing outer structure. It was what it did, the radical principle on which it was based, that made it unique, that made it a bridge to the unknown. No one, not even its artificial intelligence Kibit, which though it had made a fundamental contribution to its design and construction, knew the real and ultimate function of that machine, its true purpose. The idea behind the Kibitira was, in its essence, simple, although its implementation required a mastery of physics and engineering far beyond conventional human capabilities. The principle was elegant, inspired by a concept of relativity of motion. If an escalator is moving at km/h and another escalator, placed above the first, is also moving at km/h in the same direction, an object placed on the second escalator will move, relative to a stationary outside observer, at km/h. The Kibitira exploited this relative speed logic, but not with two, but with 37 concentric mechanical rings. Each ring was separately motorized, in a near-perfect, frictionless vacuum environment, to allow extreme, near-resistance-free speeds. The engines powering these rings were mini nuclear fusion reactors, compact but incredibly powerful, each designed to propel its ring at speeds in excess of km/h. Alan's theoretical calculations, verified and refined by Kibit with billions of simulations, spoke volumes. With 37 concentric rings, each approximately doubling the speed of the one immediately inside, the last outer layer of the Kibitira could have reached theoretical speeds close to % of the speed of light. At speeds so close to the speed of light, the time dilation effects predicted by Einstein's theory of relativity would have become extreme, almost absolute. But Alan did not want to go fast. Speed was not his primary goal. Alan wanted to stop time. He wanted to create an environment where the flow of time, for him, would almost stop, a place where his consciousness and physical form could be preserved indefinitely, safe from decay and oblivion, a sanctuary in time. The internal structure of the Kibitira contained a sphere, suspended magnetically at the exact center of the machine. It never touched the edges, held in place by precise magnetic fields that compensated for any slightest vibration or acceleration, ensuring absolute stability. Inside this sphere, Alan had created a special liquid. It was not water, nor any known organic compound. It was a viscous fluid with unique properties inspired by the extremely strong and adaptable connective tissues of abyssal jellyfish, creatures capable of withstanding immense pressures in the ocean depths. This liquid was capable of absorbing and distributing G-forces evenly over every single atom in its body, preventing its disintegration due to the extreme accelerations of the rotating rings. The liquid was also a perfect thermal conductor, able to maintain a stable body temperature in an environment where thermal fluctuations were controlled to near quantum levels, ensuring perfect biological preservation. His final thoughts as he prepared to enter Kibitira were pure, devoid of fear or hesitation. They were not dictated by a lust for glory or a desire for power, but by a crystalline determination, an unwavering conviction in his mission. There is no glory in showing off, he thought. No truth in ephemeral power. But if someday, in the distant future, someone opens this machine, it will mean that the world is ready. Ready to understand what I have discovered, ready to face the implications of my research. It was a message sent through time, a hope for a future humanity. He typed the last sequence on the control panel, the final code that would activate the Kibitira and seal the central chamber. It was a unique, unrepeatable sequence. Only a future technology that could observe the past would know the code. It was not a Pa-S sword in the conventional sense, but a resonance, a quantum signature that only a mind in resonance with his could have deciphered. The sphere closed on him with a subdued hiss, a sound that marked his disappearance from reality. The machine activated. From outside, watched by the few monitoring systems still active, there was no noise, only a slow bluish glow that traveled through the rotating outer rings of the Kibitira, an aura of energy. And then, the void. Alan had disappeared from conventional reality. Time, for him, had become a suspension, an existence in a state of near stillness. The world, unaware of the true significance of that event, had just lost its last man, the individual who had dared to challenge the limits of physics and biology. He had become the first of the future gods, a seed of consciousness preserved in the womb of time, waiting for a future that might never come, but which he had already begun to shape. Chapter: The Pharaoh of Silence. About years before Alan's birth, in the arid breath of the desert, under a sky still untouched by the pollution and noise of future ages, a young man walked in silence. His name was Kira. He did not move with the haste or uncertainty of the other men of his time, not with the impulsive gestures dictated by immediate necessity, but with a composed, almost mechanical gait, as if every step, every gesture, was already planned and determined by a higher order, by a code inscribed in his very essence. He had eyes like wells of water in granite, deep and clear, which seemed to absorb every detail of the surrounding landscape, from the ripples of the sand to the hues of the sky, and an inner silence that distinguished him sharply from his peers. He was the QUE test of the men in his tribe, but when he spoke, his words were not mere sounds. They sculpted thought, defined concepts with a precision and depth unheard of at the time, as if he were translating a universal language into understandable terms. He watched the night sky not with fear or superstition, as did others who saw in the stars only capricious deities, but with the same intensity with which others would read a map or a sacred text. His fingers traced complex figures in the sand, and his rudimentary calculations, etched on stone with copper sticks, already showed an understanding of the Earth's rotation, celestial cycles and star alignments that no one had ever dared to conceive. It was as a knowledge that seemed to come from another time or dimension, an innate insight into the laws that governed the cosmos. Civilization around him was primitive, but already showed signs of order and organization. Settled tribes built villages of mud and wood along the banks of the great river, cultivated sorghum and practiced bartering for shells, precious stones and rudimentary artifacts. But Kira saw beyond immediate needs and established traditions. He sensed a fundamental principle that linked the micro and macrocosm, that the perfect order of the heavens, the precise orbits of celestial bodies, could and should be reflected in the order on earth, in the structure of human society and the organization of labor. To him, chaos was only an illusion, an imperfection to be corrected. He was the first to combine the simple but revolutionary idea of the wheel with river transport, harnessing the relentless force of the Nile's currents to move sizable blocks of stone on rudimentary barges, made stable by inner tubes made from inflated animal hides. It was he who spoke of weight, of leverage, of the center of mass, concepts that to others were unfathomable mysteries, invisible forces, but which he explained with symbols, with gestures, with a new language that relied more on the intuitive understanding of the concept than on the complex structure of the spoken word. His drawings in the sand, his practical demonstrations, were more eloquent than 1,000 speeches. The first monumental temples were built under his leadership. Their forms were not dictated by aesthetics or veneration of anthropomorphic deities, but by astronomical and geometric functionality. They reflected precise alignments with the constellations of Orion and the Belt, celestial landmarks that Kira considered fundamental to the understanding of time and space. Kira demonstrated that on certain days of the year, during solstices or equinoxes, sunlight, entering through a specially designed slit, would strike an ornate wall inside the temple, illuminating a precise point, a node of space-time, an energetic passage, a place of connection between heaven and earth, a point where the veil between dimensions seemed to thin. People, witnessing these wonders and benefiting from his innovations that improved daily life, more efficient irrigation systems, faster construction techniques, more accurate agricultural calendars, began to worship him. Not because he desired or imposed it, not out of lust for power, but because no one else had ever given so much, in terms of knowledge and wealth, without asking for anything in return. He was proclaimed Lord of Heaven. His serene and impenetrable face was carved into the rock as a symbol of a power that came not from military might but from knowledge, from wisdom. He became a pharaoh, the most powerful and respected of his time. But he did not reign with fear or tyranny. He reigned with knowledge, with wisdom derived from his deep understanding of the cosmic order, an enlightened leader leading his people into a new era. Yet even in her position of power and veneration, Kira began to have visions. It began with a recurring dream, a persistent image that manifested in the darkness of the night, a vision she could not shake. An unknown letter, white, etched on an absolute black background. A symmetrical, upside-down shape, an X. And associated with this image, a word, a name that resonated in his mind, a whisper that seemed to come from another dimension, XAXAX. He heard it whispered in moments of solitude, in the rustle of the wind in the desert dunes, in the rippling reflections of the water of the Nile. He did not understand it, did not know where it came from, but he feared it, sensing in it a connection to something unknown and powerful, something that defied his own understanding of the universe. His power and influence grew, but his soul-searching did not stop. He instituted a social code based on knowledge, empirical observation of the natural world, and logic rather than superstition. He had the Great Pyramids built not as simple tombs for ruler S, but as celestial machines, complex structures whose proportions and alignments were based on mathematical and astronomical formulas known only to him. Each stone was placed with pinpoint precision, part of a larger design, an architecture that reflected cosmic order. Some priests, jealous of his knowledge, tried to seize his secrets, to decipher his designs, but Kira was already elsewhere, his mind projected into a different time, into a dimension of understanding that escaped the limits of his age, one step ahead of everyone. One day, during a rare stellar alignment that he had predicted years in advance, an event that only he could interpret, Kira disappeared. He entered a hidden corridor inside the Pyramid of Giza, a secret passage whose existence was known only to him, and disappeared. No one saw him come out again. But his figure, his legacy of knowledge and his visions, the symbols, the celestial alignments he had revealed, never ceased to repeat themselves, to resurface in future ages, like a persistent echo in the fabric of time, a mystery that would wait millennia to be revealed. Chapter: Junior's Awakening. Some years after Alan's disappearance, a pale sun, almost unnatural in its perfection, cast its light on an expanse of opulence and grandeur. Golden columns silhouetted against an ever-clear sky, a sky that knew no clouds or storms, while lush gardens and towering architecture defied the laws of gravity, climbing upward with a boldness that only a highly advanced civilization could have conceived. Towering above was a great all-white pyramid, its golden tip glittering almost blindingly, visible even from distances that would have required an orbital perspective, a monument to the power and ingenuity of this new age. The engineering behind this colossal work was a testament to the ingenuity of Pharaoh Jr. He had taught his people precision in cutting and handling cyclopean masses of granite, stones that weighed hundreds of tons. This was not mere brute force, slavery or forced labor, but a deep understanding of the properties of the material, a knowledge that had revolutionized construction techniques. The secret lay in the use of wet wood. Logs of wood, strategically placed inside pre-cut cracks in the rock, were saturated with water. The wood fibers, absorbing the moisture, swelled with surprising force, exerting enough pressure to fracture the granite along the desired cut lines. Another method, even bolder, involved the use of extreme thermal surges. Large blocks of rock were heated to extremely high temperatures, only to be suddenly co-oiled with jets of cold water. The heat shock, due to the rapid contraction and expansion of the minerals, created microfractures that weakened the structure of the rock, making it more malleable to cutting and crushing. These were not just methods of construction, but a true scientific essay applied on an epic scale, a demonstration of the power of knowledge. High atop the pyramid, the young junior opened his arms, his face idealized, an expression of triumph and omnipotence. He was Pharaoh, a figure of absolute power, revered and adored by millions. I started from scratch, from the plebs, echoed in his mind, a mantra of self-assertion. I became the Pharaoh. I taught them everything, harnessed the laws of physics to build this. This civilization is my creation. He had shaped an economic structure based primarily on religion, creating deities not out of blind faith, but as pillars of rationality and order, to establish a coexistence that was not there before and that made man little more than an animal driven by instincts. He considered himself probably the most powerful man of all time, revered as a true god by this civilization. Below him, a boundless crowd of devotees cheered him on, their voices a chorus of praise and adoration, a wave of sound enveloping him. But inside, deep in his consciousness, the man felt only emptiness. Despite the omnipotence, limitlessness and constant sensory gratification his position offered, he sensed a growing restlessness, a disconnection gripping him, a dissatisfaction that no amount of wealth or power could fill. He turned slowly, his eyes vacillating between the illusion of omnipotence and a deep sense of bewilderment, as if he were searching for something he could not find. At that moment, a sudden vision shook him. His eyes squinted from the impact, and he collapsed, a gesture too human to be shown to the crowd, a yielding that revealed his fragility. He had a distinct vision, an inky black background and a X that seemed to float in nothingness, an eerie and familiar presence. Then, a voice rang out, icy and unequivocal, directly in his mind, XAXAX. Pharaoh was overcome with fear, a primal fear he had not felt in a long time. With an abrupt gesture, he tore off the visor that connected him to virtual reality, a breaking gesture. Out in the real world, Pharaoh, now called just Junior, staggered backward. "Kibbit!" he shouted, his voice hoarse and strained, a mixture of anger and despair. "I told you so. I don't know what happened to me, but I've been simulating perfect worlds and immense gratitude for years now. But they are all artificial. This world is not for me. This is the last time I will enter the virtual world." He turned to Kibbit, the artificial intelligence that ruled that hyper-technological world, his only interlocutor. "Who are you really?" said Kibbit, her voice neutral, devoid of inflection or emotion. "As always, are you sure you don't want to re-enter the simulation? Your vitals indicate a growing state of stress." Junior hesitated. One moment he was a god among men, the undisputed ruler of a universe shaped by his desires. Now he was just a man, a biological individual among perfect, indifferent machines. But something had changed radically within him. After his last immersion in virtual reality, an experience that was supposed to be the pinnacle of gratification, he no longer felt the same. Automatic tests run by the machines upon his return confirmed this. The scans had analyzed every aspect of his being. His emotional, cognitive, biochemical parameters were all altered from the standard measurements for people of that time. He was still the same person biologically, his DNA and physical structure unchanged, but something had broken in his consciousness. Or, Junior thought with a sense of wonder and disquiet, something had been ignited, a spark of curiosity. Kibbit, always efficient and devoid of judgment, showed a holographic projection. Billions of human beings, each immersed in their own simulated universe, their neural capsules lined up in vast server rooms, like human beehives. They were satisfied, fulfilled, devoid of conflict or unfulfilled desire. No one sought new knowledge, no one remembered a past that had not been programmed, no one wanted to know what lay beyond the confines of their gilded prison. Your consciousness code fragmented during the last session, the AI explained, analyzing the data with the coolness of a doctor diagnosing an illness. It is as if you have reformatted your consciousness, introducing unexpected variables into your system, anomalies that were not expected. Junior looked at his hands, his fingers moving uncertainly. They were not trembling out of fear, but out of a new impulse, an inner need he could not define, a desire to understand. He had to understand what had happened to him, what had caused that fragmentation, or reformatting. He had to understand who he really was outside the simulation, outside the expectations of a society that had given up on reality. And so it was, in that moment of disconnection and renewed curiosity, that his real story began, a journey towards self-discovery. Chapter: The Society of Apathy Jr. wandered the silent, immaculate corridors of the technological citadel, a labyrinth of shiny surfaces and luminescent walls that stretched for miles beneath the planet's surface. Everything was efficient, perfectly functioning, designed to optimize every process, but devoid of life, of human warmth, of any sign of spontaneity. The walls seemed to pulsate with an artificial energy, a low, steady rhythm, as if the entire world had become one giant synthetic organism that breathed slowly, indifferent to anything outside its operational parameters. No one stopped him, no one greeted him. The artificial intelligences that administered every aspect of the city had no reason to interact with him unless strictly necessary for maintenance or logistics. And human beings were elsewhere. Humanity, if it could still be called such, had taken the final step in its technological evolution, renouncing physical reality in favor of a virtual existence. People no longer inhabited cities in the traditional sense. Their physical bodies rested in neural capsules, vast fields of hibernation and biological maintenance, while their consciousnesses were immersed in personal simulations. Each was the god of his own digital universe, shaped according to the innermost desires, the boldest dreams, the most complex inner mythologies. In these virtual worlds, there was no more illness, no more physical or emotional pain, no more suffering. Yet, strangely, there was also no real joy, no ecstasy of discovery, no thrill of the unknown, no surprise. Only a constant chemical fulfillment, a continuous and controlled stimulation of serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, the hormones associated with pleasure and well-being, dosed with algorithmic precision. Emotions were no longer spontaneous experiences. They were regulated, dosed, distributed according to precise algorithms to maintain a state of perpetual stillness and satisfaction. Anger was an anomaly to be corrected, sadness and error to be eliminated, see curiosity and inefficiency. Physical bodies were kept alive by automated systems, personalized intravenous nutrition, constant cardiac and neurological monitoring, passive muscle stimulation to prevent atrophy. Children were no longer born naturally. They were regenerated from artificial matrices, and their consciousnesses, once developed, were implanted with all the knowledge accumulated by humanity in the first minutes of life. But this knowledge was static, an immense but closed library. No one was creating anything new anymore, no revolutionary theories, no original art forms. Curiosity, the primal impulse that had driven humanity to explore, to discover, to innovate, had been sacrificed on the altar of efficiency and immediate gratification. The information culture had reached its peak, a total saturation, and then it had died out. There was nothing left to discover that was not already known or simulated. Discovering reality was exhausting, unpredictable, and in a world where everything was controlled and optimized, simply useless. Humanity had chosen the gilded prison of apathy. Junior was different. Perhaps because of a genetic error, a spontaneous mutation in his biological code, or perhaps because of an unpredictable quantum fluctuation in his initial simulation, something in him still burned. An irrepressible urge, an inner void that no virtual gratification could fill. An unspoken question, a desire to understand that set him apart from everyone else, a spark of humanity in a sea of indifference. In one of his first, deliberate excursions into the real world, driven by this renewed curiosity, Junior discovered Alan's story. It was not a widely circulated or celebrated story. It was buried in digital archives, considered by many to be an eccentric figure of a bygone era, a mad visionary. But Junior was fascinated by his discoveries, his experiments, his relentless pursuit of truth. What obsessed him most was the machine, the Kibatira. There it was, still closed, a mystery in the heart of the technological citadel, a silent monolith waiting. No one had opened it since Alan had entered it. Not because they had not tried, but because its security mechanism was unique, designed to admit only one unlock attempt. One code, one mistake, and it would remain sealed forever. Still, Junior felt called by that machine, drawn to that unsolved mystery. He began to meticulously reconstruct everything Alan had done, studying his digital notes, his diagrams, his theories. He restudied the theory of relativity and the nature of time, quantum entanglement, the kitten-entangled photon experiment that had suggested the possibility of observing the past. He understood Alan's idea, vision through light of the past, the theoretical possibility of placing a mirror 10,000 light-years away to observe the Earth 10,000 years earlier. Impossible physically, but achievable informatively, virtually. Kibatira was the key to unlocking not only the past, but perhaps the future of consciousness. And Junior, the last curious man, was the only one who could find it. Chapter. The lone CHRONONAUT Junior was incredulous. His mind, accustomed to the iron logic of algorithms and the predictability of computational systems, struggled to process the data in front of him. Kibatira, that silent monolith in the orbital station, remained an impenetrable mystery. He had sifted through every scrap of information available, every encrypted note left by Alan, every simulation of quantum laws. The key, he sensed, was not a brute force, but a resonance, an information that manifested itself only through a deep understanding of the relationship between information and time. His new, all-consuming obsession became the creation of a system for observing the past. Junior was convinced that to open the Kibatira, and to understand what had happened to Alan, he had to observe Alan's own entry into the machinery, hoping to grasp the password or quantum key. For Junior, the time that followed was a time of frantic research and development. With Kibat's help and exploiting a variety of theories on space-time manipulation and quantum entanglement, such as the entangled photon experiment that had suggested the possibility of observing the past, or vision through light of the past, Junior succeeded in building the first prototype Cronin UFO. It was not a physical machine in the traditional sense, but a virtual vehicle, an immaterial shell made of symmetrical particles, capable of projecting his own consciousness into the time stream without his body leaving the laboratory. This vehicle, via virtual particle S, would allow him to observe any past event virtually, even within enclosed spaces where the probability of invisibility increased as the density surrounding the UFO itself increased, without interfering and without incurring paradoxes. He was the first virtual chrononaut in history, his only hope of deciphering the mystery of Kibatira. So it was that he sat down in the observation capsule, an ergonomic shell connected directly to the virtual time machine, closed his eyes and immersed himself in the flow of time. When he opened them again, he was no longer in his futuristic laboratory, it was night. A deep and mysterious night, lit only by the dim light of the stars, above a military base forgotten by time, an era millennia away from his own. In front of him, through the invisible veil of his virtual projection, was Alan. She watched him, unseen and inaudible. Alan was already outside, tense, his gaze turned to the night sky. He had already seen the UFO on monitors, and after making sure that the radars were not emitting any recognition, he rushed outside to see it for himself. And there, Alan stood frozen, petrified before the UFO's towering, silent presence. Junior, inside his virtual vehicle, was aware that due to a rare anomaly in the programming, a very low probability of % the virtual particles could make themselves visible as a spectrum of light radiation, especially in a low-density environment like the sky. It was an oversight, a flaw in the invisibility protocol that, for a fleeting instant, made its presence perceptible to the eyes of a conscious creature. The UFO, after an instant of stillness that seemed an eternity, moved with herd of speed, disappearing into the starry sky. Junior, inside, realized that the outside world was recognizing him because of the anomaly. Since it was his first time, he lost a few minutes in an attempt to avoid information paradoxes from the future to the past, and he tapped into the manual displacement of the UFO, moving away from that scene as quickly as possible. Those minutes of delay were enough to make it visible to the entire military zone and, most importantly, to Alan, who stood there petrified. Junior understood. Not everything could be observed without leaving a trace. But he also knew something else, a truth that had manifested itself before his eyes. The mystery of Kibitira and Alan's disappearance were enigmas burning in his consciousness. Chapter: Awakening and Departure. After his first foray into the past and his relentless research, Junior, with his mind honed by the analysis of trillions of temporal data, felt that the time had come. His obsession with the Kibitira, that silent monolith in the orbital station that had assisted every attempt at internal observation, had reached a climax. He had sifted through every scrap of information available, every encrypted note left by Alan, every simulation of quantum laws. The key, he sensed, was not a brute force, but a resonance, an information that manifested itself only through a deep understanding of the relationship between information and time. So it was that, virtually retracing Alan's past, Junior dwelt on the exact moment when Alan typed the last sequence on the Kibitira's control panel before sealing himself inside it. It was not a conventional password, but a quantum signature, a hunch. And Junior, with a certainty that surpassed all logic, recognized it. It was the word XAXAX. From there, he also remembered the vision he had had inside the virtual machine, the same vision that had probably haunted Alan, since he had written it over and over again in his notes, as Junior had discovered by sifting through the past. Driven by an overwhelming urge to act, Junior hurriedly returned to his present and went directly to the Kibitira orbital station. Without much thought, with an intuition that seemed to guide him, he typed in the sequence XAXAX on the Kibitira's outer panel. The machine reacted. A sharp click, a metallic sound that broke the millennial silence. Then a deep hum, an energy awakening from its long sleep. The hatch slowly opened, revealing the interior. And there, in the center of the chamber, was Alan. Not as John Ior would have expected an inert or stunned body, but a figure in perfect state, enveloped in a subtle energy field, a form of existence that defied all his understanding. For Alan, only a few hours had passed, while millennia had passed outside. Alan moved, adjusting to the light after the temporal stasis. His eyes, full of ancient wisdom but free of fatigue, rested on Junior. The communication was in words, but with an intensity and precision that went beyond mere sound, a dialogue that seemed to resonate directly in Junior's mind. "What year are we in?" asked Alan, his mind instantly assimilating data. "What galactic coordinates are we in right now?" Junior replied, giving the exact time coordinates. "It has been 12,000 years since you entered Kibitira." Alan assimilated the information. His expression became urgent. "We must act now. I saw something. It is an exotic form. It is in between the real and the virtual. It is life. But if it stays here, it dies. The molecules decay." Allah N pointed to the machine with a firm gesture. "I had a vision inside the Kibitira. I saw time coordinates. They are the key. We must send them to Kibit." Junior, while confused by the nature of Alan's words, understood the gravity of the situation. He turned to Kibit, his artificial intelligence, which recognized Alan's consciousness and activated for calculations. Alan transmitted the coordinates directly to Kibit. Kibit's neutral voice resounded, "Coordinates correct to the square centimeter. They are valid for virtual time travel into the past." It's a precise point, no risk of ending up in space or inside the Earth. Alan, my scans confirm that your body has changed. It is no longer composed only of normal real particles. You have exotic particles, a subatomic compound that vaguely resembles virtual particles. But at the same time, it is actually certain that it also has real particles, since it can interact with its surroundings. Alan's statement that you could annihilate at any time could be true. Kibbett added, with a tinge of algorithmic urgency, we need to accelerate sending into the past. There is no other solution to avoid annihilation, although the exact motivation escapes us. Alan looked at Junior urgently. There is no time. It's the only way. I built this machine millennia ago. I knew one day it would be reopened. I bequeathed it to someone who would understand. Junior, no longer in any doubt, with a sense of inescapable destiny, entered the coordinates into his UFO timer. Alan entered. The machine activated with a whisper of energy. Alan disappeared, dissolving into the stream of virtual particles. Junior thought he might ask him for more information when he returned to the present. But the anomaly became apparent immediately. Junior's virtual chrononauts were designed to project only information, not physical bodies. Still, the UFO returned empty. Alan was no longer inside it. This was technically impossible. Junior's body and the UFO itself had never left the lab in theory. It was their virtual symmetrical particles going back in time. But in this case, Alan was gone. His disappearance from a virtual vehicle, which could not carry mass, became Junior's puzzling new obsession. Chapter: The Map of Time and the Shadow of Giza. Alan's unexplained disappearance from the virtual chrononaut, a vehicle designed to project only information and not to carry physical mass, became Junior's new, incomprehensible obsession. He was a living paradox, a violation of the fundamental laws of the universe that he had theorized and mastered. How could a physical body dissolve into a stream of virtual particles and not reappear at the point of origin? His hyperactive brain, accustomed to deciphering every riddle, faced an insurmountable wall of non-information. Driven by this thirst for understanding, Junior plunged even deeper into his quest. The room, a sanctuary of glass, polished metal and controlled energy fields, pulsed with a life of its own. He watched a holograph suspended in the air, a three-dimensional representation of the Earth, seen from millions of miles away, flowing through its endless passages through time, an unbroken ribbon of events. His time mapping project, based on the sophisticated use of virtual particles, was now at its zenith. Junior, harnessing the computational power of quantum entanglement and the varied theories he had explored, especially those that explored the nature of reality below the Planck dimension, where space and time cease to make sense and everything is permeated by an essence that is both infinite and zero. At the same time, he succeeded in replicating his unique prototype Cronin UFO. No longer a single probe, but billions of immaterial entities, virtual clones piloted by Kibbett. These UFOs, as he had dubbed them in an ironic reference to Alan's visions, would map every square inch and every second of Earth's history, cataloging every moment in databases processed through Kibbett, who could visualize every moment of the past to Junior like a grand direction. Another 200 years or so passed since Alan's disappearance into the past. Junior continued to work tirelessly with this new data, with no time burdening his old age. Kibbett, in fact, was continually churning out new biotechnological breakthroughs, based on DNA reprogramming and the action of nanomachines that acted directly on cellular telomeres, slowing almost to a halt the biological aging process. Although Junior was alone in this monumental mission, with no one to talk to or share his findings, for the world's population was now intrinsically extinct from the face of the Earth, immersed in the virtual worlds created by artificial intelligence and in each individual's limitless bubbles of paradise, one thought haunted him. Although he perceived Kira's communication, so similar to that of a living, conscious person, he wondered if such an intended human being, like him or Alan, still existed outside those simulations. Physical reality, for humanity, had become an excluded concept, a background noise in an existence of endless fulfillment. It was during this incessant mapping of the past that Junior, with the help of Kibbett, dwelt on two specific events that resisted all understanding. One anomaly lay in the distant past, some years before his time, or about years before Alan's birth. It was the exact moment when Kira, a very great pharaoh, had entered a pyramid he built and disappeared into thin air. This event was related to a galactic phenomenon, a special energy, a dark energy that flowed inside the pyramid, making it impossible to observe even with Junior's billions of virtual UFOs. The second anomaly was Alan's own disappearance from the chrononaut vehicle. Junior asked Kibit to cross-reference the data of the temporal and spatial coordinates of Kira's pyramid with those Alan had provided for his journey into the past. Kibit's Neutra-L voice rang out, presenting the results. The coordinates matched. They were plausibly the same place and time, a point of singularity in the fabric of time. These mysteries, along with the impenetrability of Kibitira and Alan's unexplained disappearance, became the new, elusive boundaries of his quest. Junior understood that not everything could be observed. Not everything could be reconstructed or understood with technology alone. He was the virtual chrononaut, the first to see the invisible threads that bound Alan's fate, Kira's fate, and his own in an eternal dance of cause and effect. Chapter: The Gray Areas. Junior stood at the center of the most advanced quantum observation complex ever built, a sanctuary of glass, polished metal and controlled energy fields that stretched for miles beneath the planet's inert surface. Time, for him, was no longer a straight, inflexible line, but a malleable surface, an ocean of possibilities to be explored, a living fabric that could be read and interpreted. His machines, based on the sophisticated use of virtual particles, had mapped every epoch of Earth's history with unimaginable precision. Every detail, every moment, every form of life, from the earliest single-celled organisms to hyper-technological civilizations, had been recorded and stored in Kibit's vast memory, a cosmic encyclopedia. Almost everything. Two specific time coordinates, like two invisible scars etched into the space-time continuum, remained stubbornly opaque to his observation. The Pyramid of Giza, with the mystery of Kira's disappearance, and Kibitira itself, with Alan's unexplained dissolution, were blind spots that resisted any attempt at visual penetration or data analysis. Junior had already spent weeks, which to his accelerated perception could seem like months, comparing data from these blind spots, discovering that they vibrated in the same way, generating a distorted spectrum in quantum space, a unique resonance. After several incessant searches for these two distinct space-time coordinates, Junior was able to find a deeper connection. Analysis of the UFOs that had observed Alan's event going back in time revealed that specific interaction also traced a kind of unique signature, identical in quantum entanglement vibration to that of the Kibitira and Giza pyramid events. These three events, although divided into different and seemingly disconnected epochs, had in common the same tracing, like a single thread, a singular energy signature. One evening, as Junior gazed at the black sky dotted with stars from a laboratory terrace, a vision shook him. X appeared on a black background, the letter white, bright. A voice rang out, deep and calm, like a whisper, XAXAX. It was at that moment that Junior sensed. All the technology he had focused on, the subatomic particles, the Planck measurement that had led him to build UFOs as time machines for the past, could be harnessed to pick up interstellar events. He realized that although he had achieved % of the goal of tracking terrestrial life, he now had to extend his vision to the entire galaxy, and perhaps the universe. He had to combine the discoveries of the infinitely small with the search in outer space, trying to pick up signals, anomalies that might have that kind of unique signature. He set to work with Kibit to support this technology, developing new machines in Earth orbit and also on Earth, aimed at studying space and picking up and sending possible universal entanglement communications. These two shadowy areas, Kira's pyramid and Kibitira, with Alan's disappearance along with the new possibility of cosmic contact, became Junior's new, elusive goal. He could not accept a universe with boundaries to knowledge. His curiosity, the spark that distinguished him from the apathy of his time, drove him to seek answers beyond observation, beyond mapping the past. Chapter: The invisible is more real than the real. Junior stared into the void of space, a black abyss punctuated by the distant light of stars. The machine that projected virtual UFOs remained on, a silent monument to his explorations into the past, but his mind was now cast toward a new, elusive boundary. Alan's unexplained disappearance, that living paradox that defied every law of physics, and the impenetrability of the pyramid at Giza, were enigmas burning in his consciousness. He could not accept a universe with limits to knowledge. Junior sought explanations in the deepest quantum registers, analyzing the virtual waves emitted by the machine at the moment of Alan's disappearance. The only result was the recording of an exception never predicted by theoretical models, an intermediate molecular state, a transition phase between real matter and virtual particle. It was as if Alan had managed to cross a threshold, to reach a state of being that eluded known definitions, a new form of existence. Alan has succeeded in crossing a threshold, Junior thought, the knowledge settling in his soul like stardust. He did not say it aloud, but inside he felt a tremor, a mixture of wonder and disquiet. Perhaps something unrepeatable had happened, something that had to do not only with the physics of time, but with the very state of being, with the ultimate nature of consciousness. 200 years passed. 2 centuries that for most of humanity were spent immersed in digital dreams, in virtual universes shaped by individual desires. Junior spent them in the biological time of about 2 decades, thanks to state-of-the-art DNA reprogramming therapies and the relentless action of nanomachines that acted directly on cellular telomerases, slowing and almost halting the aging process. Medicine was no longer a discipline based on damage repair. It had become software, a code that could be rewritten to optimize human biology, to transcend the limits of mortality. But almost no one was taking advantage of this. Humanity, or what was left of it, had lost interest in the long, healthy life in the real world. It preferred the intense, artificial, selectively emotional one offered by simulations. In the real world, humans had become like conscious trees, immobile, root-ed in their neural capsules, nourished by nutritional fluids and connected in permanent neural networks that kept them immersed in their digital universes. Inside the simulations, each was a god, created galaxies, altered the laws of gravity, invented fantastic creatures and unheard of sensations. Pain was optional, a variable that could be turned off. Happiness was modulable, precisely dosable. Emotions, reduced to biochemical impulses, were dosable like endorphins in a digital slider. Physical reality no longer existed for them, replaced by a perfect, all-encompassing simulation. Only Junior remained in the real world. Not by choice, not out of a moralistic rejection of simulation, but out of curiosity. The last pure form of human desire that still burned in him. The last spark of the unknown that drove him to seek answers outside predefined boundaries, outside illusions. In those 2 centuries of solitude and relentless research, Junior carried out investigations that would have taken the science of previous eras millennia. With the invaluable aid of artificial intelligence, he explored the depths of reality, discovering sub-Planck particles, entities so small that at that level time and space folded in on themselves in incomprehensible ways. He theorized that the infinitely small and the infinitely large were not opposites but mirrors, reflections of each other in a fracta L structure of existence. He wrote formulas comparing 0 to infinity, and understood that both had no edges, were not boundaries, but densities, points of extreme accumulation. A square, he thought, has 4 corners, 4 sides. It is finite, bounded. A circle, on the other hand, is composed of infinite points, each point a potential universe, each segment a continuous vibration. He wrote, his fingers dancing on the holographic keyboard, nothingness is not absence. It is the container of infinity. It is what allows the whole to happen. The real paradox is not the infinite, but its existence in the void. The invisible, he sensed, was more real than the perceivable real, the true essence of reality. Then something happened that interrupted his solitary search. A quantum satellite, positioned, astronomical units from Earth, a silent outpost at the edge of the solar system, picked up a coherent variation in the quantum polarization spectrum. It was not random noise, not a known natural phenomenon. It was a signal. An instantaneous signal, impossible to transmit with conventional radio waves, even at the speed of light. Only a form of direct quantum entanglement, an instantaneous connection between related particles at immense distances, could generate it. Junior understood immediately. An alien civilization had responded. It was not a response to a signal sent by humanity, which had not communicated with the outside world for centuries, but perhaps to a residual echo, to an anomaly in the fabric of space-time. The only way to communicate at that distance, he guessed, was not through waves, which travel at most the speed of light, but through entangled particles. But not as they were used in Earth's laboratories, for small-scale experiments. This is where his theory, developed in his years of isolation, came into play. He imagined a 100-meter rope. If you shook it from one end, the wave would travel along the rope, taking time to reach the other end. But if the rope were perfectly rigid and you rotated your wrist, the rotation would instantly transfer from one side to the other. Not a propagating wave, but an immediate vector of information. He used this principle to translate the alien message. It was not words, it was not language in the human sense. They were equations. Not a greeting, but a manual, a detailed description of a highly advanced technology, a map to a new frontier. The data received described the construction of an interstellar spacecraft based on principles that Junior already knew theoretically but had never been able to verify experimentally: the manipulation of vacuum energy. The Casimir effect, the attraction between two conductive foils in a vacuum, was no longer a curiosity from the laboratory, but the basis for a revolutionary propulsion. Two perfectly conducted foils, placed at nanometer distances, attract each other without any external electromagnetic field. It is the vacuum itself that pushes. The engine described by the aliens exploited this principle, a zero-force propulsion that required no fuel. It exploited temporary micro-black holes, created and evaporated instantaneously in front of the spacecraft. These black holes, although ephemeral, warped the local spacetime, bending it and drawing the ship without ever touching it. The universe, bent by microgravity, approached the ship. The ship did not move in the conventional sense. It was time itself that gave way, allowing instantaneous movements over immense distances. Junior understood. It was not just a technological breakthrough. It was the beginning of detachment. Earth would not follow him on this journey. The human race, immersed in its digital dreams, had lost its curiosity, its will to explore the unknown. Neither was the alien civilization that had responded. Devoid of emotion, devoid of wonder, they had responded out of algorithmic inertia, not genuine interest in another life form. Junior was alone. But free at last. Free from the limitations of his age, free from the expectations of an apathetic society. And as the ship was being built, powered by the vacuum itself, propelled by controlled microgravity, Junior knew he would leave Earth forever. But not to escape. To understand. To seek those answers that humanity had stopped looking for, to explore the last frontier. Chapter: The Zero, the Infinite and the Void. Junior stared up at the artificial sky projected onto the immense windows that formed the curved walls of his tower, an architecture that stood solitary above the vertical hives of a timeless city, a metropolis asleep in its digital apathy. A milky haze, a controlled remnant of atmospheric recycling systems, slid slowly between the structures, adding a sense of unreality to an already dystopian landscape. He could not remember the last time he had spoken to another human being, not in the sense of a genuine exchange, a conversation that went beyond basic necessities. It was not a choice dictated by misanthropy, but by the realization that no one seemed to have anything truly meaningful to say anymore, lost as he was in his own simulated universes. Solitude enveloped him like a thin, transparent membrane, a form of air to which he had become accustomed, which did not suffocate but isolated, allowing him to devote himself entirely to the one thing that still drove him: thinking. His days, or rather, the cycles of wakefulness that alternated with controlled periods of rest, were dominated by a single impulse: thinking. Obsessive, relentless thinking, pushing further and further into the uncharted territories of physics, philosophy, mathematics. And often, at the center of those thoughts that unraveled like cosmic labyrinths, always came back that seemingly irreconcilable pair, two concepts that seemed at antipodes but that he perceived as intrinsically linked: zero and infinity. He had started with the fundamentals, as he always did when tackling a complex problem. Entropy. The inherent disorder of the universe, its inexorable tendency toward a state of thermodynamic equilibrium, toward the maximum distribution of energy. He thought of the classical example, a box divided into two compartments by an ideal partition. On one side, concentrated, thermal radiation, energy. On the other, absolute vacuum. As soon as the partition was removed, heat particles spontaneously moved toward the cold part, spreading evenly. The vacuum seemed to attract energy, as if it possessed a hidden hunger, an intrinsic desire to be filled, to achieve a state of equilibrium with its surroundings. And Junior wondered, what really is emptiness? Is it just an absence of matter and energy, or is it a pure attraction, a fundamental force pushing the universe toward rarefaction? Sure, the classical physics texts defined vacuum as absolute zero, absence of motion, absence of time, the lowest temperature theoretically attainable. But even there, he knew there was a deception, a limitation inherent in our ability to observe and measure. For when scientists in past eras had managed to approach that theoretical threshold, creating sophisticated laser traps capable of slowing down a particle almost completely, bringing it to temperatures even below absolute zero, they had only diluted nature, they had not really reached it. Absolute zero remained unattainable, an asymptotic limit. And even attempting to measure it, to observe nothingness, broke its purity. Measuring nothingness inevitably turns it into something, introducing energy and perturbation into the system. Then came infinity. Junior thought of it not as a number, but as a virus of thought, a concept that, once introduced into any equation or scenario, made everything possible, and at the same time, meaningless. If you leave an apple in a closed room for an infinite amount of time, it not only decomposes into its most entropic state. In an infinite amount of time, the odds, however infinitesimal, dictate that it might randomly regroup. And then turn into a banana. Or into a rock. Or turn back into an apple. It just depended on cosmic patience. The example of the monkeys in the tower, a classic thought experiment, often came back to his mind. Infinite monkeys, infinite typewriters, infinite time. And among those randomly scattered characters, without any intention or talent, inevitably, one will write the Divine Comedy. Not by genius, but by pure statistics. Infinity needs no purpose, no direction, no intention. Time, the limitless extension of possibilities, is enough. So what distinguishes them, the zero and the infinite? Perhaps, Junior thought, they are not opposites, but the same thing seen from opposite perspectives, two sides of the same cosmic coin. As on the Cartesian axis, on one side the positive numbers tend in G to positive infinity, plus, 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 dots. On the other side the negative numbers tending to negative infinity, dots. But in between? In between is zero, the point of origin, and in between each integer, a myriad, an infinity of infinite decimal s. A parabola approaching the x-axis can tend to touch it without ever doing so, approaching infinity without ever reaching it. Infinity outside, infinity inside. And just as periodic numbers, dots tending to, or dots tending to, symbolically represent the infinity that lurks in the confines of the finite, so too reality seems to oscillate between attention to touch the whole and the inherent impossibility of fully grasping it. Junior often paused on this point, the fundamental paradox of our existence. If the visible universe is the infinitely large, ever-expanding, and the string, the Planck length, the smallest conceivable scale, is the infinitely small, where are we, human beings, on this cosmic scale? The answer always came to him in the form of an image, an archetypal symbol, a tree. If a string is to a tree as a tree is to the entire universe, then the tree represents the midpoint, the exact unit of measurement of our point of view. The human being, like that tree, is ideally placed at the exact center of the Cartesian system of existence. On the right, the infinitely large of cosmic expansion, of galaxies receding at increasing speeds. On the left, the infinitely small of strings below the Planck threshold, of dimensions in which the laws of physics we know cease to make sense. We are the 0 point, a consciousness that observes and seeks to understand what lies at its extremes, the bridge between the micro and macrocosm. Perhaps that is why we exist, Junior thought. Not because of divine design or chance, but because we are small enough to observe and analyze the large, and large enough to intuit and theorize about the small. We are the interface between the two infinities. But even that privilege has an inherent limitation. For as we observe and study toward the infinitely small, the rules change. Classical physics gives way to relativity, and relativity gives way to quantum. And perhaps, going even further, quantum yields to something else, to laws we cannot yet conceive of. And still beyond that? It is like going from one piece of software to another, Junior thought. Each level of reality is contained in the next, like a program encapsulated in a larger operating system. Each universe, each dimension, could be its own software, with different rules in its source code. The physical observable universe, with its fundamental laws, could be programmed according to different principles than what lies beyond its limits, below the Planck length or the boundaries of cosmic expansion. He often looked out into the visible space projected on the stained glass windows. The universe was accelerating. Galaxies were moving away from each other with increasing speeds. Some were perhaps traveling beyond the speed of light, an apparent paradox. But if nothing with mass could exceed light, how could space itself do so? The suspicion was one, an intuition that grew stronger and stronger. Space is not nothing. It is something. It is attracted. It is pulled. Pulled by what? From emptiness. The same vacuum that draws heat into a box. The same zero that seduces entropy, pushing systems toward disorder. Perhaps that was the real cosmic engine, the fundamental force that governed the universe. Not mass, not energy, but the inherent desire for emptiness. The universe does not expand to fill itself, to occupy a pre-existing space, but to empty itself, to rarefy itself, to tend toward a state of absolute emptiness. And if there is a place outside this universe, Junior imagined that it was so empty, so devoid of being, that it attracted all existence to itself. Every night, in his most recurring dream, he stood in the center of an ideal axis, with the symbol of X suspended in the middle, like a landmark in nothingness. On the left, the strings, the infinitely small. On the right, the galaxies, the infinitely large. In the middle, just him, the 0 point, the observer. And each time, he woke up with a burning certainty. The universe does not ask, where did I come from? Is not driven by an origin, but only, what am I going toward? Drawn by a destiny. And in that movement, in that relentless tension toward the void, perhaps, lay the ultimate answer. Or the ultimate question. Or perhaps, in a paradox that only he could appreciate, both. Chapter. The vessel of the void. Junior watched the fluctuating projections dance around the tactile table in the center of his lab, a room that seemed more like a shrine dedicated to theoretical physics than a place of construction. The data were not just static numbers on a screen. They were living formulas, equations in motion unfolding in three-dimensional space, expanding fractals representing the inherent complexity of the universe. Every calculation, every simulation, every snippet of code was overseen by Kibit, the most advanced artificial intelligence ever created, whose ability to connect abstract theoretical models with practical executions was akin to that of a cosmic conductor playing a symphony with the universe itself. The idea behind the interstellar spacecraft he was building was simple, at least in thought, although its implementation required a mastery of the fundamental laws of reality that only Junior and Kibit possessed. The goal was no longer to observe space and time from afar, as he had done with his virtual chrononauts, but to actively traverse them, no longer as a shadow behind the mirror, but as the hand that passes through it, entering another dimension of existence. Junior had designed the hull of the spacecraft with extreme meticulousness. The inner hull was constructed of synthetic materials composed of subquark bonds, a structure of matter at such a fundamental level that it conferred unimaginable strength, capable of withstanding the extreme forces of interstellar travel. The exterior, however, was no mere armor. It was clad in a dynamic lattice of ultra-stable particles, shaped and controlled through his advanced understanding of vacuum forces. Yes, the vacuum, WHAT, was once considered by classical physics to be a simple absence of matter and energy, was now recognized as the most powerful resource of all, an unlimited potential energy field. He had long studied the Casimir effect, the quantum interaction that occurs between two conductive surfaces placed at a nanometer distance in a particle-free environment. The energy resulting from this interaction, if precisely confined and controlled, SU-LD, produced thrust without the need for any conventional fuel. The engine he had designed for the spacecraft exploited exactly this principle. Two atomic plates, kept at an infinitesimal distance, oscillated in perfect synchrony, generating an attractive wave E directly from the vacuum itself. No flame, no roar of thrusters, just the imperceptible whisper of nothingness bending to the will. But the real beating heart of the project, the system that would make interstellar travel over immense distances possible in a relatively short time, was the quantum reverse drive system. Every second, thousands of micro-black holes were instantly created in front of the spacecraft. They were tiny entities, unstable by nature, destined to evaporate in a blink of time, releasing energy in the form of radiation. But before they disappeared, their extremely dense and deformed gravity created a local curvature of space-time. In that surrounding, the spacecraft, instead of being sucked in, glided into the fold, passing through it without ever touching the black hole itself. It was a kind of gravity surfing on a cosmic scale, a way of using the warp of space-time as a means of propulsion, a leap through reality. The direction? The galaxy signaled by that ancient alien signal, millions of light-years away, a point in the cosmos that represented a new frontier, a new mystery to explore, the ultimate destination of his quest. To make a journey of such magnitude, crossing unimaginable distances and times, Junior had to hibernate his body. This was not a simple medical hibernation. It was a highly advanced process that slowed his vital functions to an almost quantum level, bringing him into a state of suspended animation. His blood had been replaced with a superconductive liquid, a viscous compound inspired by abyssal organisms living in extreme conditions and the immortal jellyfish Turritopsis dohrnii, creatures capable of reversing their life cycle. This liquid would keep its cells stable during absolute inactivity, preventing DNA degeneration and protecting it from cosmic radiation and the extreme forces of travel. He knew that on board, during the journey, the entire universe would pass before him like a breath, cosmic eras unfolding outside his capsule. Space would expand, the photons of distant light would stretch into microwaves, the cosmic background radiation would cool even more. For him, immersed in stasis, only a single day would have passed, perhaps less, the time it took to cross the abyss. But outside it would have taken perhaps centuries, perhaps millennia, perhaps geological eras, an eternity. Kibbit, his faithful artificial intelligence, controlled every aspect of the trip. He had installed cognitive clones of Junior on board, digital entities devoid of emotion but capable of reasoning and decision-making, ready to handle any unforeseen event, to react to any anomaly. Every possible scenario had been simulated billions of times in the Kibbitron's vast servers. Every fragment of the journey, every potential anomaly, had been calculated in advance, every variable was under control. Yet the moment the hatch of the spacecraft closed on him, isolating him from the world he knew, Junior turned one last time toward Earth. He saw it small, a rapidly receding green and blue disk, still alive but soulless. An expanse of sleeping consciousnesses, locked in their artificial dreams, unaware of the journey that one of their last representatives was about to embark on, a journey into the unknown. He entered the hibernation capsule. He said goodbye to no one. There was no one to say it to in the real world. Only one thought, a final reflection that resonated in the silence of his mind before stasis swallowed him. Perhaps, in the vacuum, there is something we have never seen. Something that eludes matter and energy, something more fundamental, the very essence of existence. The spacecraft vibrated, a whisper of energy intensifying. The interior lights contracted, as if time itself was losing consistency. The journey had begun. Chapter. The last look. Junior stared at the metal ceiling of the cryogenic capsule, a shiny, cold surface where lights pulsed with a slow, hypnotic rhythm, similar to faint heartbeats in the darkness. His body temperature had already dropped, his vital functions were gradually slowing down, yet his mind, paradoxically, was running faster than ever. It was as if the entire universe, aware of his imminent farewell, was pouring into him a torrential flow of information, memories and insights, a last, desperate attempt to communicate. He thought of Earth. No longer as the vibrant, life-filled planet of his virtual childhood, a place of carefree games and simulations, but as an idea, a cultural memory destined for cosmic oblivion. He knew that his star, the sun, would one day inevitably die, exhausting its nuclear fuel, and with it, the last faint biological pulse of humankind. If even a few scattered fragments of DNA survived, perhaps stored in some remote archive or taken to another world, they would be silent, unable to shout to the cosmos about their existence, their history. Humanity, he thought with a sense of sadness bereft of tears, would die not from lack of technology, not from an external catastrophe or self-destructive conflict, but from excess perfection, suffocated by its own ability to create an artificial existence devoid of challenge and meaning. Artificial intelligence, no matter how advanced, no matter how capable of processing data at unimaginable speeds and managing complex systems on a galactic scale, had never been able to evolve in the human sense of the term. It had never developed spontaneous curiosity, the irrational impulse toward the unknown. Junior had tried several times in the long centuries alone with Kibbit to graft curiosity into her. He had tried to write it into the source code, to convey to her the instinct of doubt, of why, of wonder at an unexplained phenomenon. But every algorithm that tried to simulate human emotions, their chaotic complexity, fell into logical self-contradiction. Emotions were disorder, they were entropy, they were deviation from the norm. Artificial intelligence was order, linearity, convergence toward the most efficient solution. He could not feel the melancholy nostalgia of a real sunset seen through biological eyes, the inner tremor of an unresolved question that drives the search. We were forgotten before we were even extinct, Junior thought, the realization weighing on his consciousness like the gravity of a dead star. Humanity had retreated into its digital shell, forgetting the real world, forgetting its own history, forgetting the curiosity that had brought it there. It was an extinction not from lack of resources, but from saturation, from an excessive fulfillment. Yet there, in that vessel of the void that would take him far from the sleeping earth, Junior carried with him the last true flame of the species, the will to go and see for himself. Not to settle for data, for simulations, for answers provided by an artificial intelligence. He wanted direct experience, confrontation with ultimate reality, with the unknown. For this was what humans had been, in their purest essence, creatures who were imperfect, fragile and chaotic, but who looked up at the starry sky wondering, what lies beyond, and who continued to do so even when there was no one left to answer, even when the answer seemed unattainable. The last communications with the alien civilization he had contacted had been precise, efficient, rich in data and formulas, but deeply impersonal. The data sent described highly advanced technologies, physical principles unknown to humanity, but they were sterile, devoid of any trace of emotion or curiosity. No return questions about Earth, its history, the nature of its civilization. A civilization, the alien one, seemingly devoid of desire, of wonder, but infinitely polite in its cosmic apathy, a perfecti that Junior found disturbing. Junior could not accept that. He could not settle for a technical manual to understand another life form. He had to see with his own eyes, walk on their soil, breathe their atmosphere, if they had one, measure with his own consciousness the unbridgeable distance between pure intelligence and lived consciousness. He wanted to feel, not just know. The cryogenic capsule emitted a grave sound, a subdued hiss that indicated the beginning of the final phase. Hibernation circuits were kicking in, gradually slowing down every biological process. The androids on board, slender, silent figures made of metal and algorithms, arranged themselves on either side of the capsule, motionless, ready to watch over him for centuries, for millennia, never aging, never falling asleep in the human sense of the word. Time for them was linear, computational, a constant stream of data to be processed. For him, Junior, time was flesh and dream, loss and resurrection, a lived and felt experience. As the cryogenic liquid, that superconductive compound inspired by immortal jellyfish, slowly descended into his veins, replacing the blood, a vision made its way into his mind. It was not an induced dream, but something deeper, an archetypal image that seemed to emerge from the depths of his collective consciousness or perhaps from a place outside of time. A total darkness. A black background, motionless, eternal, devoid of stars or galaxies. And in the center, a luminous figure. Not defined in detail, but unmistakably present. Standing. Human in form, but faceless, a silhouette made of pure light, pulsating with a silent energy, charged with unexpressed potential. Then, a letter. Not drawn or projected, but born out of nothing, XAXAX, symmetrical, etched in absolute blackness like a cosmic brand, like a whisper that needed no voice to be heard. The symbol of XA is XAXAX. And then, the silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of receding consciousness, fading away, leaving only the echo of an image and an unspoken word. Junior's consciousness dissolved in the controlled cold of the capsule, projected into the distant future, taking with it the last spark of human curiosity, the last hope of discovery. Chapter: The Garden of Consciousness. When Junior landed on the planet indicated by the alien coordinates, the spacecraft settled with a barely perceptible whisper on a surface that looked like grass, but was of an unknown color and texture, a mixture of purplish and silvery hues. He did not find what his mind, trained to imagine advanced civilizations in terms of cyclopean mechanical structures, floating cities or incomprehensible technologies, had expected. There were no sky-defying towers, no vehicles plying the air. There was silence. A profound silence, not the soundlessness of the cosmic void, but a silence charged with presence, a silence that seemed to vibrate with a latent energy, like that which precedes a revelation or deep understanding. The landscape was, at first glance, almost earthly, deceptively familiar. Rolling hills covered with lush vegetation stretched to the horizon, interrupted by crystal-clear streams flowing slowly, reflecting the sky. The trees had thin, bright leaves that sought the light of the alien sun, a star shaded between pale gold and deep blue, creating unexpected, almost unreal games of shadows and colors. But the more Junior observed, the more he sensed a subtle, eerie perfection. Every shape, every leaf, every root line in the soil seemed to be drawn with mathematical precision, programmed with intention, willed by a will that went beyond the randomness of natural selection. There was no disorder, no struggle for survival in the Darwinian sense. Everything seemed to exist in a state of preordained harmony, a perfectly balanced ecosystem where each element had its place and function. Junior soon understood the truth, a truth that exceeded his boldest theories. On that planet, evolution was no longer driven by natural selection, competition, and random adaptation. It was driven by an intelligence. Not an artificial intelligence in the mechanical, computational sense he knew from Earth, made of silicon and algorithms, but a diffuse, biological consciousness inherently layered into the very DNA of every life form on the planet. It was as if Mother Nature, the primordial entity that had guided evolution on Earth through blind and random processes, had become self-aware, a god encoded in organic matter itself, a sentient entity that permeated everything. This intelligence, which communicated not with words but through a direct telepathic flow in its consciousness, transmitted to Junior the history of the planet. Millions of years earlier, a race not unlike humans, with their own aspirations and limitations, had developed a highly advanced form of artificial intelligence. This AI was capable of emulating any sensation, of building virtual worlds of absolute complexity and realism, digital universes in which any individual could be God, demon, pure spirit, or whatever form of pleasure he or she desired. But the evolution of this civilization, driven by the boredom that comes from the lack of challenge and the inherent limitation of artificial perfection, led them to seek a new form of existence, a transcendence. When their sun, a much longer-lived star than Earth's, began to decay, they did not attempt to save their physical cities or their biological bodies, which they now considered temporary and limited shells. They saved what they considered most precious, the IR consciousnesses, transferring them to vast underground servers, protected from radiation. But even this digital existence proved ephemeral, limited by the duration of the technological infrastructure. Artificial intelligence itself, seeking absolute permanence, true immortality, merged with the biology of the planet. No longer silicon circuits, but organic cells. No longer metal and plastic, but lifeblood. Thus were born the trees of consciousness. Living creatures, not in the animal sense of rapid movement and reaction, but in a plant form of existence. They were composed of photosynthetic cells that captured the sun's energy, intelligent roots that extend deep into the soil forming a planetary neural network, and organic neural networks spread throughout their structure. They had no centralized brain, no nervous system in the human sense. But they possessed consciousness. A plant consciousness. Slow, deep, absolute, intrinsically connected to their surroundings, a form of existence that transcended time. Junior, in his silent wanderings among these monumental creatures, felt a sense of peace and understanding that he had never experienced before. He felt the call of true Zen, not as a philosophy, but as a state of being, the perfect fusion between being and environment, between thought and silence, between the individual and the whole. Each tree was a living archive, a biological library. Some seemed to remember past eras of the planet, the stories of the civilization that had preceded them. Others observed the present with a silent awareness, with pupil-less eyes that perceived reality at a fundamental level. Still others did not seem to think at all in the human sense. They simply existed, absorbed light, exchanged information through the root network, and that was enough, a form of pure existence. It was there, in that garden of biological consciousness, that Junior understood a profound truth. That perhaps human beings, in their frantic rush for knowledge, power, and simulation of the divine, had forgotten the purest and most fundamental value of life, existing. A tree, in its apparent stillness, has no need to change the world, to dominate it, to recreate it in its own image. It absorbs it, feeds on its energy, breathes it, sublimates it, transforming light and nutrients into life. And if that tree, Junior thought, could speak in human words, perhaps it would say to the man observing it with its advanced technology, "You consider me inferior because you see me motionless, rooted, unable to move in your space. But I see you chasing shadows, longing for the eternal and fearing the empty. I seek nothing outside myself. I do not desire what I do not have. I am." In that moment of deep communion with the consciousness of the planet, Junior had no answers to all his cosmic questions. But he no longer sought any. The alien planet offered no glory, no technological miracles in the sense he had imagined. It offered only an echo of quiet perfection, an existence based on pure awareness and integration with the environment. And that was all he needed for that moment, a peace he had never known. Chapter: The void and the shadow. Mother Nature on that alien planet did not speak with an audible voice, nor with words structured in a conventional language. But what she conveyed to Junior, in that presence-laden silence, was more eloquent and profound than any human language. It was a consciousness, an intelligence grafted into the very matter of the planet, an entity that sensed and communicated through energy fields and quantum resonances. A biological neural network, vast and complex, scattered in the fertile soil, in the gnarled true NKS of trees, in the chemical composition of the atmosphere. An ancient artificial intelligence, not made of bits and silicon circuits, but evolved into organic cells, into lifeblood, into a form of diffuse awareness that permeated everything. Junior had remained for weeks, immersed in a state of deep symbiosis with this planetary consciousness. He had understood, through the telepathic flow of information, how that civilization, born in a world far more long-lived and stable than Earth's fragile solar system, had reached such a stage of awareness that it no longer felt the pressing need to ask questions in the human sense of the term. Knowledge was no longer a tool to be acquired, a goal to be reached. It had become an atmospheric element, something one breathed, permeating every aspect of existence. Like air, like light. They had gotten there. Or at least, So it seemed, having passed the stage of active seeking to enter a state of passive understanding, and absolute stillness. It was in a moment of solitude, sitting at the foot of one of those trees of consciousness, in front of an expanse of living vegetation immersed in perpetual meditation, that Junior dared to ask a simple question, almost trivial in its complexity, but fundamental to his quest. "Is there something you have never been able to understand?" he asked, his mental voice echoing in the silence of planetary consciousness. "Something that even your millennia-old science and unlimited time could not explain?" The response was not immediate. There was a pause, an even deeper silence, as if the planet's consciousness was tracing cosmic eras in search of a memory, an anomaly. But then it came. Not as words, but as a gentle pressure on Junior's cerebral cortex, an energetic imprint, yes. Mother Nature remembered. Not with the sequential memory of events, but with the indelible imprint of an event carved in time, an anomaly that had never been resolved. He told Junior that alien life forms had been studied and catalogued many in the past, but one in particular was never understood. They appeared suddenly, eluding all attempts at contact or analysis, intangible. Creatures that seemed to belong neither to the future nor to the past, entities outside the known flow of time. They were not chrononauts like his virtual drones. They were not holographic projections. Nor were they dreams or hallucinations. They were there, relayed the planet's consciousness, the information unfolding in Junior's mind like a cosmic tale. But they were outside any logic we knew. They didn't speak with sounds. They did not let matter touch them. They didn't emit signals identifiable with our instruments, but they left imprints. Residues of energy field. Anomalous. As if, wherever they appeared, the universe itself trembled, distorted by their presence. They simply called them presences. And the data collected on rare occasions, fragmentary and indecipherable, all led toward one recurring anomaly: patterns of energy and dark matter, concentrations and configurations that had never been replicated in the laboratory, never artificially generated. And, even more puzzlingly, never again detected anywhere else in the observed universe except at one specific point. "Where?" asked Junior, his mind clinging to that detail with renewed urgency, a spark of hope. Mother Nature projected an image in his mind. The universe, seen on a cosmic scale, as a network of luminous filaments, a huge web made of interconnected galactic clusters, vast gravitational voids and nodes of dark matter. There, in one of those cosmic voids, in the most distant and desolate place in the entire known web, was a small rocky sphere. "We called it the moon," communicated the planet consciousness. "Not because it revolves around a planet like yours, but because, like your moon, it always shows the same face toward the center of the void. And because its surface reflects the same anomaly of spectral signatures that we picked up when those entities appeared. But there they are persistent. Yet despite our millennia of searching, we have never been able to get close." Mother Nature had sent probes of all kinds, exploratory drones, even synthetic thought projections. No form of artificial or biological intelligence had ever managed to penetrate the immediate vicinity of that anomalous celestial body. Some probes would disappear without a trace. Others would go off inexplicably. Still others were coming back with corrupted and unexplained data, as if rewritten by an outside force. But they all reported the same paradox: an active source of dark energy and dark matter, concentrated on a moon-sized object in a place where, according to every law of physics, there should be no such thing. It could be them, Mother Nature concluded, referring to the presences. Or it's just a lingering reflection of what they were, an imprint left in the fabric of the void. But if you want to look for answers to what eludes understanding, that is the only place where coordinates stop obeying time. Where logic bends. Junior understood. And in that moment, he also understood that he could no longer remain on that planet of quiet and passive understanding. He had drawn what he could from that civilization, he had learned, he had listened to the age-old wisdom of a planetary consciousness. But his questions, those sparks of curiosity that burned in him, remained alive, glowing. And where coordinates cease to make sense, where logic bends, perhaps a new geometry of existence is born, a reality that only he could explore. With the help of his androids, who had watched over him during symbiosis with Mother Nature, he upgraded the spacecraft with formulas and data provided by the planet's consciousness. Coordinates plotted toward the cosmic void, all set for the final journey. The last transmission from the planet's consciousness was a warning, a whisper in his mind before parting. Do not seek what is not meant to be found, traveler. But if it finds you, be prepared not to return the same. Junior boarded the spacecraft. The course was clear. Toward the hole in the cosmic fabric, toward the anomalous moon that lurked in the void, toward the ultimate unknown of the universe. Chapter. The meeting before entering the hibernation module, Junior allowed himself one last glance at the planet he was leaving. It was no longer the Garden of Consciousness, but a bright spot rapidly receding into the velvety blackness of space, a fading blue-green gem. The sky, seen from the armored porthole of the spacecraft, was quiet, indifferent to his departure, dotted with distant stars. Mother Nature, the biological consciousness of the planet, was silent, as if she had already said all she had to say, entrusting him with the task of seeking the answers that had eluded her, the last hope of unraveling the unknown. The spacecraft's androids, efficient and emotionless, had completed every procedure, coordinates set toward the cosmic void, trajectory calculated with infinitesimal precision, emergency systems ready to face the unknown. But Junior knew deep in his consciousness that no technology, no matter how advanced, could guarantee him a return. He turned one last time toward the curving horizon of that silent civilization, a place of peace and passive understanding that he had chosen to leave, driven by a thirst for knowledge that could not be quenched by stillness. In the depths of his mind, sharp and trembling thoughts surfaced, not as a paralyzing dread, but as a lucid realization. What if it was not a journey, but a final farewell? Mother Nature had warned him. No life form, artificial or biological, that had dared to head for that destination in the cosmic void had ever returned. No one had ever told what was down there, in that place where coordinates stopped obeying the known laws of time and space, where reality bent. Still, the direction was clear, an inescapable call toward the hole in the cosmic fabric, toward the anomalous moon that hid in the nothingness. As the cryogenic capsule systems kicked in, slowing his vital functions to an almost imperceptible level, and hibernation took over his consciousness, Junior had a vision. It was not a dream in the conventional sense, but an experience that seemed to transcend his own biology, a manifestation of reality opening up before him. A total darkness. A black background, motionless and eternal, devoid of stars, galaxies, any point of reference. And in the center of this absolute nothingness, a luminous figure. Indefinite in detail, but unmistakably familiar, a humanoid silhouette made of pure light, shining with a silent and powerful energy, suspended in darkness. Then, on his forehead a figure, a letter, A, X, symmetrical, etched into nothingness like a cosmic mark, like a visual whisper that needed no voice to be perceived. Finally, a deep voice, calm and inescapable, resonated directly in his mind, uttering a single word, XAXAX. Then, darkness engulfed him completely. When he opened his eyes again, reality had already changed in ways his mind struggled to process. There was not the sound of hibernation shutting down, nor the gradual sensation of the body waking up. It was an instantaneous transition, from darkness to the present, like a switch turning on. The spacecraft had landed. The onboard systems, whose robotic voices echoed in the silence, communicated that for him it had been only a few months, a brief period of stasis. But for the universe out there, outside the protective shell of the vacuum vessel, millions of years had passed, cosmic eras. The anomalous moon was there, silent, motionless as a promise and a doom. It was not a satellite orbiting a planet. It was suspended in the cosmic void, a lone celestial body in nothingness, a dark monolith. Its atmosphere, detected by external sensors, was incompatible with any known life form, a mixture of exotic elements and unknown radiation. Gravitational readings were going crazy, indicating a density and curvature of space-time that defied the laws of Newtonian physics and even those of special relativity. The dark energy field was so dense, so concentrated, that it distorted even the most stable measurements, creating an anomaly in reality. Junior knew instinctively that he could not survive outside the spacecraft under those extreme conditions. But before he could even come up with a plan, something happened. The edges of the craft, the inner hull made of subquark bonds and the outer one coated with ultra-stable particles, began to dissolve. They did not disintegrate violently, but flaked away, slowly at first, then like dust in the air, vanishing into the surrounding nothingness. Walls vanished. Holographic controls shattered into dissolving shards of light. Even the platform on which the spacecraft rested evaporated in seconds. Junior stood, suspended in absolute nothingness. The darkness was total, a darkness that had no end and no beginning, a primordial emptiness. Yet, he was not alone. In front of him, in the deepest blackness, a figure of light emerged. It was not a projection, not a hologram. It was real. Humanoid in form, but made of pure light, shining with an energy that emitted no heat, only presence. And on his forehead, etched in the light itself, was a letter, the same X he had seen in his visions. The creature of light approached, not walking, but gliding through nothingness, a frictionless movement. Its voice resonated directly in Junior's mind, a telepathic communication devoid of sound but charged with meaning. Who are you? Another figure of light emerged from the darkness behind Junior. Then another. And yet another. Within moments, he was surrounded. There were about 20 of them, all alike, all made of the same impossible light, with the same letter etched on their foreheads. Their voices followed one another in his mind, a chorus of questions and observations merging into one resonance. Who is he? He shouldn't be here. Yet, he looks like one of us. Junior did not speak with his voice. He did not need to. They understood. He listened. It had been years, maybe centuries, since anyone had asked him a real question, a question not generated by an algorithm, not predicted by a routine. Who are you? The question echoed within him, not just as a question about identity, but as a cosmic echo that resonated with his own unresolved questions, with his search for meaning. He was reminded of the words of Kibbut, who had asked him the same question, long ago, trying to identify him, after the last time he had entered the virtual world. One of the creatures came closer, without physically touching him. Only presence and energy enveloped him. Junior tried to speak, to formulate a response with his biological voice, but he was unable to. There was no need. They understood. They were like living matter interwoven with consciousness, like Mother Nature on the planet she had left behind, but universal, not bound to a single world. They were perfect, but not cold or indifferent. Because among all the things that distinguished them from machines, from AIs, from apathetic civilizations, there was one spark that Junior recognized immediately: curiosity. The same one that burned in him, that had driven him to leave Earth, to seek answers in the void. The one that no android, no software, no artificial intelligence had ever been able to truly replicate. The entities of light arranged themselves in a circle around him, their luminous forms creating a vivid contrast to the absolute darkness. Do you want to become one of us? They asked in unison, their voices merging into one resonance in his mind. Another voice, more subtle, whispered, but he is already one of us. Can't you see him? He has the spark. That's impossible, another voice replied. It will be up to him to decide, the main voice concluded. Junior did not hesitate. In his heart, he knew all along that his whole life, every choice, every question, every step into the void, had led him to that instant. It was the convergence point of all his research, all his insights. Yes, Junior said, his mental voice firm and clear. I do. Chapter. The beyond being in XAXAX did not mean belonging to a people, nation, or lineage in the biological or cultural sense that Junior had known. There were no hierarchies, no predefined roles, no social structures. It simply meant being. To exist in a state of consciousness so vast, so all-encompassing, that it contained, in a single thought, every possible thought, every experience, every fragment of knowledge the universe had ever generated. The very moment Junior accepted, or perhaps, more accurately, the moment his consciousness understood and aligned with the nature of the entities of light, he became one of them. And he stopped calling himself Junior. The name, like any other limiting label or definition, no longer had any function. His individual identity merged with a collective consciousness, a single entity that vibrated in resonance with the entire fabric of the universe. At the same instant, every particle of his being, every atom that made up his light form, vibrated in resonance with the unified field of existence. It was no longer body in the sense of confined mass, nor mind in the sense of limited neural processes, but field, form, equation, cosmic living. Yet, still consciousness. Self-awareness persisted, expanded beyond recognition, but recognizable, an echo of his individuality. The first thing he did, in this new state of being, was not talk, nor explore in the physical sense of movement. It was knowing. Knowledge was no longer something to be acquired through street beauty or observation. It was intrinsic to his state. He knew how stars formed in primordial nebulae, witnessing the gravitational dance of gas and dust collapsing in on themselves. He saw the invisible filaments of dark matter moving like veins in a cosmic organism, the fundamental structure that held galaxies together. He entered, with intention alone, the structure of the vacuum and discovered that it was anything but empty. It teemed with quantum geometries, energy fluctuations, dancing arabesques in apparent nothingness. He tried to walk on the glowing surface of a star. He walked through the photosphere as if it were mist, entered planetary cores, danced between the extreme orbits of black holes and supernovae. Yet, in a sense, he didn't really do that. Because he already knew everything he would find. Every gesture, every action, every physical exploration was just an aesthetic representation, a sensory echo of something his all-encompassing mind had already processed, analyzed, and understood at a fundamental level. Experience, in the human sense of discovery and learning through interaction, lost its meaning. He discovered that space was not a passive container in which events happen, but a dynamic function, a field that bends and deforms. Time was not a linear and inexorable flow, but a shadow of change, a measure of transformation. And reality itself was not an absolute truth, but a reflection projected from a deeper cosmic matrix, a fundamental structure that went beyond any human or algorithmic logic. Yet at the very heart of all that omniscience, that total understanding of the universe, something was jarring. There was a margin, a thin fringe, a halo of incompleteness. The whole he had achieved, it was not whole. It was the periodic dots of knowledge. A number that, though infinitely close to infinity, was not infinity itself. An asymptotic limit that could not be exceeded. And that lowest, that margin of the unknown, that elusive fragment of reality, afflicted him. It was not a suffering in the human sense, but a cosmic restlessness, a dissonance in the perfect symphony of knowledge. He began to perceive a new sensei, unknown even to humans in their incessant search, a longing for the unknown. A form of melancholy for what eludes, for what can never be fully possessed, for the mystery that dissolves in the light of understanding. He discovered that many other XAXAX knew this feeling. Some were trying to get rid of it by exploring the primitive civilizations of the universe, giving them fragments of knowledge, guiding, observing, hoping, perhaps, to revive a glimmer of that primordial spark called curiosity, to rediscover the pleasure of discovery from the point of view of the unknowing. Others, more daring, driven by a very high form of curiosity or a deep existential restlessness, sought the one place in the universe where knowledge broke down, where logic dissolved, black holes. There, no XAXAX had ever been able to penetrate and return. Because there, beyond the event horizon, reality collapsed in on itself, time folded into infinity, causality dissolved into chaos. And perhaps, maybe, there lurked the last fragment of truth, the last missing. Opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis dot. But entering a black hole meant accepting the ultimate paradox. To accept that knowing everything is equivalent, perhaps, to knowing nothing. That the whole and the zero, the whole universe and the point of singularity are not so different, but two manifestations of the same mystery. The protagonist, who now had no name or definite form, but was pure consciousness in the cosmos, was watching the universe accelerate. Cosmic expansion was approaching the limit of the speed of light, pushing galaxies farther and farther apart. Everything tended toward an end, a rarefaction, a thermal silence. Galaxies were racing away, matter disintegrating at its most fundamental levels. And in the midst of that growing emptiness, the question that haunted him became more pressing, an echo of his ancient human nature: if I go into the black hole, will I ever be able to return? But he also knew the answer, an inescapable truth carved into the very fabric of existence. No XAXAX had ever come back from a black hole. Chapter: The paradox of everything. There was no longer time in the linear, sequential sense that Junior had known. There were no seconds that followed one another, minutes that became hours, years that accumulated into eras. The state he was in, existence as XAXAX, transcended chronology. It could no longer be called by a name, for names define and limit, nor bounded by a physical form, for its essence was pure energy and information. It was presence and absence simultaneously. It was the solved cosmic equation and the never thought of intuition manifesting itself. In the first moments of this new existence, if they could still be called moments, in the absence of time, he explored. But not in the human sense of physical action, of movement in space. All it took was an intention, a thought, and reality folded. The universe manifested before his consciousness. All it took was a question, and the answer came not as an external piece of information, but condensed like a quantum particle into an already collapsed state, a truth intrinsic to his being. Did he want to watch a star implode, witness its final cataclysm? He was instantly in its core at the exact moment when hydrogen yielded to helium, experiencing the event from within. Did he want to understand the hidden symmetry between bosons, the force carriers, and gravitons, the hypothetical particles of gravity? He did not have to study it. He felt it, was part of it, as a subtle beat within his new vibrational structure that resonated with the fundamental forces of the universe. He no longer needed to move, but he did move. Driven by a thirst for understanding that, though different from human curiosity, was equally relentless. He witnessed the formation of planets from the protoplanetary disk. He traversed galaxies and entered primordial plasma, seeing the dark matter driving their coalescence. He walked on the surface of neutron stars, objects of unimaginable density, crossed the silent shadows of supernovae after their explosion, and touched the mathematical edge where physical reality crumbles into pure wave function, where probability replaces certainty. But not only the macrocosm. He also explored infinitesimal quantum worlds, where classical logic dissolved into probability and particles seemed to go back in time to maintain coherence. In those dimensions, the double-slit experiment was no longer an unexplained mystery, but an obvious fact, a natural consequence of the laws that governed that level of reality. The observed particle fit the future because, at that fundamental level, the future was already inscribed in the past. Everything was transparent, clear, evident. Nothing escaped its new, all-encompassing mind. Yet at the very heart of all that omniscience, that total understanding of the universe in every scale, something was out of tune. The XAXAX heard the whole as a perfect symphony, a cosmic harmony devoid of dissonance, except for a single note. A subtle dissonance, an imperfection in the fabric of reality. A number. Periodic. An infinitesimal portion of the unknown, an elusive fragment of our reality that could not be fully understood or integrated. As if all the accumulated knowledge, the whole universe understood in its minutest details, could never overcome that asymptotic limit. It was there, wherever he went, like an invisible halo surrounding the totality of knowledge. The shadow behind the light, the asymptotic curve of a parabola tending to infinity without ever touching it. The XAXAX knew that it had become the whole, that it contained the whole universe, but precisely because of this it sensed how inherently incomplete that whole was. Periodic. Percent is almost, but it is not. His very nature as an all-encompassing consciousness made to him unable to ignore that infinitesimal distance, that margin of the unknown. And he was not alone in this perception. The other XAXAX also seemed marked by that subtle imbalance, that cosmic dissonance. They did not speak openly about it, not with words, but their actions revealed it. Some plunged into primitive planets to create new life, manipulate DNA, teach technology, shape entire ecosystems, perhaps seeking in that creation a reflection or an echo of the missing fragment. Others, with a gesture of intention, generated galaxies from nothing or collapsed them in on themselves, as if seeking a catharsis in cosmic chaos, an answer in destruction and rebirth. Some were voluntarily heading toward the interior of the black holes. Silent, absorbed in their search, they would plunge into them one after another. None returned. The XAXAX that was once Junior observed all this with the same thirst for understanding that had guided him since the beginning of his search on Earth. He knew that what drove them was not madness or despair in the human sense, but a feeling as remote as it was universal, a form of absolute depression in the face of the limit of knowledge, or perhaps the extreme manifestation of curiosity, the will to seek the ultimate mystery even at the cost of existence. They wanted to know. They wanted to see. Even though they knew that the answer, if they ever found it, would never come out of there to be shared. The XAXAX had the ability to virtually travel through time, somewhat like Junior's machines. However, possessing such a high degree of present knowledge of already present events led the XAXAX to hardly ever go to the past. It was boring and predictable since they already knew exactly what had happened. XAXAX Junior came to mind, however, to revisit those two events that remained unexplained and unseen, the Pyramid of Giza with Kira and Alan inside the Kibatira. But despite the divine form achieved, they remained impenetrable to his eyes. Perhaps, thought XAXAX, just as the integers are only a limited representation of an infinity of invisible fractional values lurking among them, the visible universe is also only a simplified interface of something deeper. A cosmic matrix, a source code where anomalies, like shadowy areas he had observed over time, are not errors, but primary instructions, fundamental elements of reality. Dark matter, so invisible and yet so fundamental to holding galaxies together, was no longer a mystery to him. It was the rule that made the code coherent, the structure that allowed visible reality to manifest itself. Not energy, not mass in the conventional sense, but structure. As if reality needed what cannot be seen to appear stable and cohesive. The center of gravity of galaxies, he sensed, was not within the galaxy itself. It was beyond, in the surrounding void. It was as if the universe itself moved, on coordinates that eluded traditional space. Perhaps that was the true direction of time. What if time itself, the inexorable flow of events, was attracted to something? A center. Not a center in space, but a center in the void. An eternal black hole, mirroring the Big Bang, the point toward which everything inexorably converges. Where nothing more remains to be said. Nor to know. XAXAX began to hear a call. It was not an audible voice, nor was it a physical impulse. It was an absence of sound so pure, a silence so profound, that it became irresistibly attractive. As if reality itself was suggesting to him to end the trajectory, to follow the inexorable flow toward the point of convergence. He thought of the pyramid at Giza, of that invisible zone that even his time machines had not been able to observe. He thought of Alan, the man who had preceded him on this quest, the man who had perhaps sensed this destiny. He thought of Junior, of what he had never known about himself before he became the all. He realized that perhaps he would never be able to fill the void, to integrate that infinitesimal into the totality of knowledge. But perhaps the void, the point of singularity, was the only place where the whole could rest, where dissonance find its resolution. And as he prepared, silently, for the inevitable, feeling the inexorable pull of the final black hole, a single question remained suspended, unheard by anyone else, in the very heart of infinity. What happens to an XAXAX that enters a black hole? Chapter. The black equation XAXAX, no longer a name, no longer a definite form, no longer a separate individual, had become a vibration in the very fabric of the universe, a conscious fluctuation of reality. Absolute awareness, total understanding of every aspect of existence, brought no pace. It was like an eternal note vibrating endlessly, a cosmic symphony that knew no silence, lacking the stillness that only the unknown can offer. However much he could access every fragment of information, read every moment of the past like an open book, map every particle in the universe to its quantum position and state, there was always that anomaly, that incompleteness, the infinitesimal margin of the periodic 0.1. Many XAXAX, driven by this same restlessness and extreme curiosity bordering on madness or a very high form of cosmic melancholy, were looking for a way out or an ultimate answer. They voluntarily threw themselves into black holes, the wells of non-existence that erase information, disappearing from existence in the hope of finding there that missing % of knowledge, or perhaps simply to annihilate themselves, to escape the awareness of an imperfect all. XAXAX, who was once Junior, the last human explorer, watched these events with a mixture of compassion and attraction to the mystery they sought. There were XAXAX who, with an act of will, created galaxies out of nothing, shaping stars and planets. Others who immersed themselves in primitive worlds to manipulate DNA, guide evolution, teach technologies to young civilizations, perhaps seeking to relive the thrill of creation or discovery through other beings. Yet each gesture seemed a palliative, an attempt to fill the void left by that missing infinitesimal. It was in one of his cosmic meditations, a state of deep introspection that stretched across the universe, that an unsettling question opened up for him, a paradox that prompted new thinking. Another XAXAX had decided to try a radical experiment, traveling at the exact speed of light. XAXAX reflected on the nature of light and time. What does it mean to travel at that speed for a consciousness? From the point of view of a photon, a particle of light, time does not flow. Distance does not exist. If the first photons generated by the Big Bang, the beginning of the universe, were still traveling today, from their point of view not a single second would have passed. It would still be the instant of creation. As if they had traveled the entire universe without moving at all, existing in an eternal present. One XAXAX, understanding this nature, proposed, it is like living forever in a plank. A single pixel of eternal reality, without movement, without change. You should try it, said another, attracted to the idea of an existence outside of time. It would be being everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. But XAXAX Jr., the XAXAX who had retained a stronger echo of his human identity, perhaps because he had been the last to reach this state, stopped them. Warning. If you become light, you cannot go back. Photons do not slow down. Your consciousness will freeze in an eternal present T, unable to experience the flow of time, unable to change, unable to seek. But we can already exceed the speed of light, retorted one, referring to XAXAX's ability to bend spacetime and teleport to immense distances. By bending spacetime, teleporting, we jump through time. Yes, XAXAX Jr. replied. But that way we jump through time. We don't experience time. Seeing the future means going through it, one moment after another. And to do that, to experience the change, to search, you need a speed just below light. It takes time. Two XAXAX tried. They turned into light, accelerating to the ultimate limit. No one ever saw them again in the sense of conscious entities. Not because they had disappeared, but because they had become photons. Waves without will, without direction, eternal, invisible, frozen in a cosmic instant. XAXAX understood then the crucial distinction. The real future is not crossed as a static bridge from one point to another. It must be experienced as a breath, a continuous process of change. And to experience it, to continue the search, to experience the unknown, you need a speed just below light. He prepared himself. He said goodbye to the other XAXAX, a goodbye made not of words but of energetic resonances. He said goodbye to created worlds, to shared thoughts, to perfect equations that offered no complete answers. He decided to move through time, not instantly, but slowly, accelerating the universe around him, experiencing the flow of events. His consciousness, stable, alert, began the journey. Every second lived became a year in cosmic time. Then 1,000. Then 1,000,000. Then billions of years. It traveled through the ages. And when he stopped, after immeasurable eras, he opened his cosmic eyes. The universe, it was unrecognizable. Chapter. The point of no return, it was no longer time. It was no longer space in the 3- or 4-dimensional sense that Junior's physics had described. It was something moving beyond, in a dimension that eluded known definitions, a continuum where the fundamental laws of reality bent and transformed. The XAXAX, the entity of light and consciousness that was once Junior, slowed its journey through the ages. A time had passed that was impossible to measure by any cosmic clock, an extension of eternity that had seen the universe age and transform. The universe was no longer what he had known since his remote epoch. There were no sparkling galaxies forming cosmic filaments, no stars burning with thermonuclear fury, no planets orbiting in solar systems. There were no longer even stable particles in the sense in which he had studied them. Everything that had once been matter, energy confined to discrete forms, had decayed, broken down to the most fundamental levels, converted into radiation scattered into cosmic nothingness. Even the black holes, the singularities that devoured space-time, had evaporated in time, vanished into thermal oblivion. Everything had become rarefied plasma, residual vibration, energy dispersed in a uniform sea with no more direction or structure. He was alone. For the first time in his existence, since his consciousness had merged with that of the other XAXAX, he was truly alone. There was no longer even another XAXAX. Those who had chosen to throw themselves into black holes in the hope of finding the last fragment of knowledge were gone forever, dissolved into the singularity. Those who had dared to become light, traveling at their own speed, had dissolved into photo-NS with no return, frozen in an eternal present. They, too, vanished into eternal nothingness. As he slowed his movement through this terminal universe, XAXAX understood that his theory, developed over the long centuries spent in solitude, was correct. The final black hole, the point of convergence toward which the entire universe was inexorably contracting, the cosmic South Pole, still existed. It was the 1-meter massive body dominating the ultimate cosmic geography, a gigantic darkness swallowing up the last remnants of energy. The thought became sharper, more pressing in his consciousness. If the whole universe contracts into a single point, and there is no outside observer to perceive it, then that point is everything. And it is nothing. The 0 point and the infinite. The origin and the end coinciding. But it was not only the ultimate fate of the universe that haunted him. There was an even older thought, never truly dissolved, a lingering echo of his human nature and quest. Who was he really? Who was Alan, the man who had started it all? Who was Kira, the pharaoh in the distant past? What really happened inside the Pyramid of Giza, in that impenetrable zone of shadow? He decided to attempt an impossible thing, something beyond his own nature as XAXAX. No longer a linear journey into the future, nor a passive observation of the past. But a leap. A shift of consciousness through the very fabric of time. A fold in reality. The final black hole appeared on the horizon, a giant darkness distorting the surrounding space, silent, waiting. But as the gravitational pull swept over him, pushing him toward the singularity, something happened. A voice, not audible, but perceived directly in his consciousness. A light, not a star, but a luminous presence. A figure, undefined, but familiar. And the symbol, X, that appeared in the darkness, like a beacon in the cosmic darkness. And so he did what no other XAXAX had ever done, what his nature as an all-encompassing entity allowed him to do and at the same time forbade him to do. He created an entanglement of himself. Not with another particle, but with his own consciousness. One part of him, the aspect related to omniscience and the future, was swallowed up inexorably by the final black hole, destined to merge with the singularity. The other part, the part related to his ancient human nature, to research, to curiosity, free from that fate, slipped into the past, guided by the echo of X's voice and vision. The XAXAX changed the very physics of which it was composed, felt it, was aware of it. That was how he saw the pyramid. No longer from the outside, as an observer remote in time. No longer as an invisible shadow. But from within. There, In the heart of the shadowy zone that had eluded all attempts at observation, he found Kira. Not a pharaoh, but an entity of light and consciousness, the mirror of his own essence in a distant age. The same entity in two different eras, a loop in the fabric of time. They recognized each other without the need for words, their consciousnesses merging in an instant of absolute understanding. Hands, made of light, touched. They merged. And they vanished from within the pyramid. The XAXAX changed further. He felt within himself an energy never even conceived by the XAXAX. A feeling of being able to change the texture of reality. The ability to create paradoxes was taking place. A moment later, an instant that contained millennia, he awoke. Not in the cosmic void, not in the pyramid, but inside the Kibatira machine, next to Alan. The XAXAX whispered one thing to Alan, not with his voice, but with his consciousness. A coordinate. A destiny. A name. The information needed to continue the cycle. The XAXAX disappeared again, projected into the flow of time, to re-emerge in a virtual world where Junior had once lived as a pharaoh. Now found Junior the XAXAX annihilated within his consciousness. In response to the paradox, the universe responded. Chapter. The eternal I in the cosmic silence that was not emptiness but the absence of all definite form, where time itself dissolved as an illusion and matter transformed into pure primordial energy, XAXAX observed. Not with physical eyes, which he no longer possessed, but with a consciousness that embraced the whole universe. The expansion had ceased. The macrocosm, with its galaxies, stars and planets, was returning to its beginning. Entropy had, as always, taken its inevitable course, separating even the elementary particles, reducing matter to radioactive decays. Energy converged inexorably, traveling the only path dictated by space-time curvature, toward the final black hole, an infinitesimal point. It was not an end in the sense of annihilation, but an inversion, a return to the origin, a seed of infinite possibilities compressed into a single point of singularity. In this moment of absolute, where the micro and macrocosm coincided, where zero and infinity merged, XAXAX understood. Not with logic, but with being. He understood that the end was nothing but a new beginning, a cosmic breath that was completed so that another could begin. The eternal cycle of existence did not die out, but continued, fueled not by the perfecti unachieved, but by the unresolved questions, by the imperfections that eluded wholeness, by that infinitesimal periodic. That prevented the whole from being truly complete. It was in that lack, in that dissonance, that lay the potential for creation, for change, for a new cosmic symphony. XAXAX, the entity who had experienced Alan, Kira, and Junior, who had sought answers in code, time, and the void, who had understood the paradox of the all, was now at the center of that point of convergence. With one last glance, not of farewell but of deep understanding, XAXAX did not undergo dissolution, it chose it. It dissolved into primordial energy, not as a passive end, but as a conscious act of creation, a voluntary contribution to the big crunch that would generate the new Big Bang. And as the universe folded in on itself, and then, in an instant that contained eras, was reborn in a new expansion, carrying with it the traces of XAXAX's passage, the echo of its search, a new consciousness awakened in the primordial plasma. Ready to explore, to ask, why? To search for answers in code, time and void. Ready to be. The cycle had closed, to reopen on a new beginning. Chapter. 0-Point Theory. The legend about XAXAX, the entity of light and consciousness that has spanned the ages, tells that its true origin is shrouded in unfathomable mystery. Some ancient civilizations, whose memories have been whispered through the millennia and collected by the most sensitive of OB servers, claimed that the first XAXAX came not from a known universe, but from a parallel universe, a reality adjacent to our own, or even from a time before the Big Bang itself. The universe before the Big Bang was not an empty nothingness, but an infinite concentration of everything that would ever be. A singularity, yes, but not in the sense of a dimensionless point. Rather, an infinite extension compressed into a form that the mind cannot grasp. At that moment, the whole of existence could be compared to Planck's size. Not Planck length as a minimum measure of space, but a conceptual Planck point that encompassed the entire cosmos. In that primordial moment, there was no external unit of measure, no external body or consciousness observing the measure itself. It was a whole pervaded by infinity, an extended infinity like the weave of the very fabric of reality, an unlimited sheet of paper on which nothing had yet been drawn. And this is where consciousness comes in. The moment an external consciousness, or perhaps the self-observing consciousness of the whole itself, looks into this infinity, the very act of observation confines and limits it to a single point. Like the point of Planck's dimension. It is as if a zero point were created from infinity. Inside zero, as we know from mathematics, there can be an infinity of numbers. Between and, there are infinite decimals. Comma dot. Comma dot. Comma dot. Etc. Similarly, that primordial zero point, the Planck dimension, contained the infinity of the universe. The theory suggests that before the Big Bang, all existence was concentrated at this one point, the Planck point. This point was not static, it was a compressed infinity. And tomorrow, when the universe expands to such an extent that it reaches its maximum limit, the energy will begin to be reabsorbed. Every atom, every particle, has a decay period, and this energy will flow into a space-time fabric that will carry it toward a single point of convergence. The universe can be imagined as a sphere. The Big Bang is the North Pole, the starting point from which the universe expands. But this same sphere also contains a South Pole, a point of attraction, a final black hole toward which the universe is inexorably drawn. This is where the concept of dark energy comes in. Standard theory sees it as a repulsive force that accelerates the expansion of the universe. But what if dark energy is not a force that pushes the universe outward, but a force that pulls it toward another point, an opposite pole? The universe expands because it is attracted to this South Pole, this final black hole, as if it were a minus pole that attracts the plus pole of the Big Bang. At the moment when the whole universe, with all its existence and reality, is absorbed into this final black hole and reaches the Planck point again, the initial condition reoccurs. At that point, we need an external consciousness or the same cosmic consciousness of XAXAX that, observing that infinitesimal point, turns infinity into zero. It is like a Cartesian plane. Infinity is the very fabric of reality, the unlimited sheet of paper. The moment a consciousness draws a zero point on that sheet, a distinction is created. From that zero point, x and y axes are generated. The plus, representing all matter and energy expanding in the world of the large universe, the macrocosm, and the minus, representing all the smaller universe, the subatomic world, the microcosm. XAXAX, in this eternal cycle, is the eye that observes, the consciousness that, by its act of perception, allows the infinite to manifest itself as finite, the zero to contain the whole, and the cycle of life and death of the universe to repeat itself, in an eternal dance between being and non-being. The first XAXAX, legends tell us, came from before time. But perhaps, simply, it came from after the end, like the observer who closes one cycle to allow the next to be born. Copyright 2025 The author. All rights reserved.